Well, we're waiting for people to come to the show. Will lots of people come? We really don't know. So we're just gonna play a musical introduction for you. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm standing in an empty space. My mind has drawn a blank. It seems that I am overdrawn at the ideas bank. I've sung of love and girlfriends, microwaves, and my car. I've written songs about my dog and being a pop star. But now I'm on the run because my credit is no good. I robbed my imagination of everything I could. The First National Bank of Ideas has sent a guy named Guido after me. If I don't come up with new ideas, this guy named Guido's gonna break my knees. Oh yes he is. I'm so afraid it's gonna hurt. Oh yeah. Guido holds the hammer high above his head. I guess I should be thankful that he hasn't made me dead. The hammer falls upon my knees with a resounding crunch. Oh, I've swallowed my tongue, but that's okay, 'cause now I don't need lunch. The First National Bank of Ideas has sent a guy named Guido after me. If I don't come up with new ideas, this guy named Guido's gonna break my knees. Oh yes he is. I'm so afraid it's gonna hurt. Oh yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Whining On with Matt Bowden. Please put your virtual hands together and welcome your host for the evening, Matt Bowden.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Whining On. Right, let's get you on the right side here. Everybody, welcome. Welcome to Whining On. As usual, me, Matt Bowden, the Encores Rogue. Today, I'm joined again with the very lovely David Cassel. Dave, can I ask you a favour?
Yeah, sure.
Before we go on, can you give people a brief pebble step just through your last interview up to the point where we talk now about you being in Australia?
Oh, sure. Previously on Matt Bowden's Whining On with David Cassel. I'm a director and a producer of outdoor theater and special events. I'm a street performer. In the 80s, I was an artistic director.
Everyone else here, Dave, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Haven't been able to hear me at all? My mic is muted, it says. Did you mute me? Am I muted?
Technical difficulties running well as ever. I don't know if it's me you can't hear or Dave you can't hear. I'm going to quickly exit and come back in. You keep going, Dave. Hopefully it's me. If not, we'll get you to do that.
It
you
said
love
that
the song. We heard the song.
Oh, good. Okay.
One of us is being heard.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just talk to people while you figure that out. For those of you that weren't here last time, I talked about the 80s and the fact that I had gotten started as a street performer when I was 16, and then I moved on to doing some theater shows and eventually became the artistic director of my own little theater company called the Interlude Mime, and traveled around Western Canada for a long time. And then you can hear me now. Is that good? Are you there, Matt? Fantastic. So that's largely my 80s history. I was running a theater company. I was doing street shows in the summertime. I ran a small ensemble. We did some experimental shows called we did one called the Windwalkers. I'll show you a picture. Anyway, it was like a stilt show, and we did a thing called Precision, which was based on an Australian group that I saw at the 1976 Commonwealth Games in Edmonton. It was a drumming spectacular, and we all wore these white suits. And I was so inspired by the guys that I saw that came from Australia. I had to do something kind of inspired by them. So we did those sorts of things. And then in the late 80s, the theater company was shut down because of some funding changes that were going on. We changed from a liberal government to a conservative government, and then actually a social government, not a liberal government. And then I was in Toronto as a soloist and independent producer. And then in 1991, I made my first trip to Australia.
And that's where we were from the last interview. Please check out the last interview. There's a lot more in it than what we mentioned here. It was a beautiful interview. I really enjoyed it. So
I hope I got it all like compressed, because last time you were asking me, what do you do? And I was like just waffling on. So.
No, Whining On is the name of the show.
Okay.
You're more than entitled to do it. And it was a wonderful thing to listen to. So you've developed a show in Canada where you were beginning the show by hugging people, and you're doing a show which had more of a theatrical basis than most street shows you'd see. Now, I got the sense that thing developed more in Australia. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, because I come from one of the colonies, and the Canadian colony is a very polite place, and the shows have to be kind of really geared to I suppose you would call it a more family-oriented sensibility. But I found that when I got to Australia, I was being pushed a little bit by the public to be a little bit more courageous and more demanding, and pushing the envelope with the audience. So I'd created this show. It was called Hotch's 3D TV at the time, and it did well in Canada for me because we have a very media oriented population there. I mean, everybody's media oriented, but in North America, we were all born and bred on television and cable TV. So my objective was to create a show that cut quickly like TV, and I would devise 30-second bits and 1-minute bits and how sort of jam them all together like a really fast edited TV show, but live, and my promo photo back then was me bursting out of a TV set. So yeah, that's kind of how it started. And when I got to Australia, I found that they had a much more inviting public, that getting volunteers on stage was something that they were used to. It was like they had an outdoor culture that lasted 8 months of the year, where we had it for, like, if we were lucky, it would be like 12 weeks. So, there was a big change.
Yeah. And so when you first went to Australia, had you been to a lot of other places before? Was this like David in a big new country kind of thing, or?
My first international excursion was to a place in Teramo, Italy in 1986. That was my first overseas flight. I applied to this festival in Italy, and it was called Street Animation, and there was no fee. Essentially, they put you up in a hostel, and you got to pass your hat. They gave us these really beautiful, signs. Mine said David Cassel, Canada, and it had, a street animation logo in the corner. And I've got that thing to this very day sitting in the lower left-hand corner of my windshield in my bus. It's lasted that long. It still looks perfect. And I remember I went there and I met Tony Kashawi, who was an Australian, and he was doing a Commedia dell'arte mime show. And that was kind of where I got my first international chops, where I had to figure out how to do a show, that was primarily visual, because they didn't speak a lot of English in Italy, like not really anything. So I learned the phrases like "Lo spettacolo inizia di qua 1 minuti, immediatamente io faccio giocolieri, una sfera rosa, una torcia estremamente pericolosi e una bambina." And I think they would laugh at me just because I wasn't saying anything correctly, and that was about yeah, that was about the extent. I learned some Italian for the show, but beyond that, I was out of bounds. So then I didn't leave the country again until 1991. And what had happened was I'd actually I'd fallen down a flight of stairs right at the beginning of the season. It was May, and I had a big Canadian summer booked. I was playing at festivals all over the country, street festivals, and I fell down this flight of stairs, and I totally did my left ankle in. It was like broken in like 5 places. It looked like a jigsaw puzzle. And I was freaking out going, oh, what am I going to do? It's like, I gotta earn my money. This is where I'm going to earn my money. And they put my foot in the cast, and I thought, I'm going to have to go to Australia. And I heard that they had, a scene down there, but I didn't know much about it. So I got home and I did some research, and there was no internet back then, but I had somehow managed to get somebody to give me a contact. His name was Steve Scott, and he was running the Australian Buskers Festival out of Coffs Harbour. So I wrote him, I wrote him a letter, and then I phoned him, I think. And the interesting thing is that I was applying for a visa to go to Australia. And I didn't call him until I had the visa. And the interesting thing was is that I'd broken my ankle. I hobbled into the Australian consulate to get my visa application. And my father was an Australian citizen. So I figured maybe I should try and go for a residency permit. And because of the work I'd done with my theater company and, I'd created a few jobs and stuff like that. And I had quite a lot of street theater experience in Canada. They granted me a permanent residency visa pretty much 3 weeks after I applied for it. So before I'd even been to the country, I had a piece of paper saying that I was legal to be there.
Well, it was a different time then, wasn't it? Different time.
Different times entirely, man. It was like, and I remember the first time I got on the plane to fly down there. So I called Steve Scott and I said, hey, I hear you run a festival and I just got my permanent residency papers and I'm coming down to Australia for my first visit. And he goes, oh, mate, you're an Australian citizen. Well, the best I can do is give you a job. So come on down, mate. And I was just like, sure. So I got my ticket. I got on the plane. And I remember back in those days that the airlines were really just starting to send planes down to Australia. It was like twice a week. And I remember getting on a United Airlines flight. And I think it had like 50 passengers on it. It was a 747. I could lie down across 5 seats, and it was glorious. I slept, most of the way. I was so excited for like the first 8 hours. I just stayed awake, because I wanted to watch movies on the screen because they were up at the front of the thing. So I stayed awake for as long as I could. And when I had to sleep, I opened up all the arm rests and I laid down on the thing and I was like, and I fell asleep.
So you had a pleasant flight to Australia. That's unusual.
Yeah, it felt like I was like, there were very few people on the plane and it felt like it was my personal 747. My carbon footprint, God, geez. Anyway, so yeah. So I got to...
when you first arrived, was there a bit of culture shock going on?
Yeah, I arrived at like 4:30 in the morning. And by the time I got out of the airport around 5:30, 6 o'clock, I hopped in a taxi and I arrived in Sydney. And I remember that I showed up, went to King's Cross. Oh, I met this guy on the plane. That was the thing. I met this guy on the plane and we started talking and he was from Australia. He was a businessman. And I told him what I was doing and that I was going to spend like a week in Sydney and then go to this festival and maybe hang out, until like February. And it was like September, I think. Yeah, it was September. And he says, where are you staying? And I went, I actually have no idea. I'm going to get off the plane and I don't know, go find a backpackers or whatever I can, afford. And he was like, oh, well, listen, I've got a special discount rate at this hotel, King's Cross. And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah. When we touch down, I'll make some arrangements for you. And okay. So I got in there and I got this great deal on a 6th floor, apartment. It was like a live-in apartment thing. And I got to stay there for the week at this, ridiculously low rate. So it was just all good luck and good fortune. But I remember arriving in Sydney on the day with my gear and I got to King's Cross and I checked into the place and then I walked around and there was carnage everywhere. It was like there'd been this big, massive street festival the night before. And I was like, yeah, they've had a party here. It was like, where were we? I was in Paddington, I think. Paddington Market is where I was walking around where they'd had this thing. And I found out that the previous night they'd had something they call the sleaze ball. So later in the year, they have the Mardi Gras, which is this big gay and lesbian thing. And then, the other half, half a year before they do sleazeball. And I guess the streets had just been, insane crazy with people partying and reveling for this thing. So as I walked around, there was like, old drag queens walking around with, smudged makeup and, dresses. And I'm like walking around going, okay, so this is Australia. Cool. Yeah. All right. And I made my way to Paddington Market where I met Dom Ferry, who I think you've had an interview with.
Yeah, you interviewed Dom Ferry. Great.
I met with Andy Zapp and I met Damien and a few of the other performers there, and they made me feel so at home. I showed up on the pitch and they, I got into the draw. I was given a space to play, and it was just so welcoming. The people were just so friendly, and I remember that the whole first month that I was there, it was nothing but win, and it was just nothing but
what was the first show like then?
Oh, it was exciting, hi, my name is David Cassel. I'm from Canada. Oh yeah, it's like, oh, thank you for loving where I come from. You don't
I
even.
heard this thing that Australians are really standoffish. That you have to sit there for 20 minutes, slowly, like beckoning a cat with a saucer of milk to come and watch you.
Well, I think I was a bit. I was doing my thing, and I have to be honest. It wasn't like an easy build. It wasn't like instantaneous. I had to work, and the thing about my act at the time was that I was employing some techniques which I think were unique to the day, and people are always on the lookout for something that's a little bit different. And I think my act was.
Do you care to talk about those techniques?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, the hugging thing and everything was kind of central to my act at that point in history, and there was some of the requisite following that I did, but I like to climb things. Earlier on, I used to climb to wherever I could get to, and I had these arrows of mine, which have become my trademark, and I would climb. I'd jam them in the back of my pants, and I'd climb to the top of a lamp standard, and I'd stand up there pointing my arrows at myself, going show, and then I'd gather things like I'd get all the kids to come and gather around the base of the lamp standard or whatever it was I was hanging on to, and then I'd get them to all like lay in a pile. Like, okay, you kids lie there. I'm gonna jump down from here, and you're gonna cushion me as I fall. And people would just keep coming over this, and I would just keep building these sorts of things up. So there was a lot of improvisation, and that came kind of from my days living in Calgary and doing theater sports and learning theater sports. I didn't really play it, but I learned a lot about it, and it really came in useful in the show. This concept of yes, let's, and that if somebody in the audience made an offer, that my training was to run with that offer any way that I could, and then get to my routines, which were fast and furious and musical. There was a lot of music. I remember that my first sound system was this, because I was trying to figure out how to. I got into making sound systems over the next 12 years, kind of like Stuff and Things does today. I was that guy back then, and I had this. I'd gone through, I think my first one when I went to Australia was with this big 25, 30 kilogram road case. And it had a CD changer in it, and a boom box. So there were two speakers in the side of the thing. There was a CD changer loaded in the bottom of the thing with I think it changed 6 CDs, and I could do it with a remote, and it all get patched through the CD boombox that I had. It was a monster thing.
Kids, that's the iPod of that day.
What was the iPod of the day? Oh God,
60 songs.
Yeah, it was just yeah. I was like, I remember that it worked well for the first week, but I was pushing it around on a skateboard because I had a little bitty skateboard bit in my show. And it was really there to sort of push my gear around. So this big road case went on the skateboard, and then I could ride it down smooth streets. But in Canada, we always had paved roads, and I'd never even thought about what I was going to encounter when I got to Australia. And there was a lot of bumpy streets, and so I'd be going trying to get my thing. And I didn't give any thought to the fact that the CD changer inside was quite a delicate unit, and it was usually supposed to be in a car with suspension. So by the end of the first week, springs were falling out. I'd be like, "Oh, what's this? I wonder where that goes," And eventually, it just stopped working. So I had to go back to my old system of changing CDs. And then I went and got a cassette player and I put it all in. So there was always that thing as street performers do of modifying the technology. I had a microphone that was plugged into the system that worked, that it was a little lavalier that clicked on here. And then, so I got it kind of
radio mics at that point, or was it still with a wire?
No. It was a wireless. It was a Samsung. And that was one of the things that kind of sort of set me at the beginning of at the thing, is that I decided that I wanted to be hands-free. I didn't want to have any wires. So I searched and bought at the time it was $1,200, which in 1991 dollars was a lot of money. And so I had this belt pack, and I had this lavalier mic that clipped on with a magnet, and it was an omnidirectional microphone. So that meant that as long as I was in front of my speakers and I didn't face my speakers, I wouldn't get any feedback. And in that first system was really kind of, it was loud and it was powerful. It had a big gel cell battery, a 24 amp hour gel cell battery, just to keep everything running. And I fixed it by the time I got to the festival, because that was the thing. My show revolved around this thing. So in that first week, it kind of fell apart, and then I had a week before the festival, so I took it apart and I put the springs back in where I thought they went, and I made the thing work, and it got me to the festival. And I had the backup system of the cassettes. And that was the thing, is that the amount of gear you carry around just for backup, just in case things failed, that you had to have something.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Were all the performers using headset mics at that point, or was everyone unmiked, or was people using kind of wired handhelds? What was the normal predominant thing that everyone was using in Australia at that time?
There was a mix. I think there was a mix. And to be honest, I don't recall too well. That there was also this philosophy back then that if you had to use an amp, you weren't really a street performer. That you had to figure out how to develop your stage voice and to work on the streets using your voice. And I've always agreed with that, but I used a digital pedal in my voice to start my show, and I would start it by hitting the pedal, and it would go, I'd go, and it would be repeating. So I was singing harmony to myself, which was a huge crowd draw, because then I would just like do digital looping things. Like, it wasn't looping, it was a digital delay. So it was the precursor of looping, and I'd sit there and I'd do goofy sounds, and then I had 6 settings on it. So, a child would come up to me and I could set it to channel 6, where I would get the big evil voice. Child, put that down, and it would come out as this, and the kids would all run away. And then I had this other setting where it was like fantasy voice, where it went into all different frequencies and made me sound
like a flange kind of effect.
Yeah, there was a flange effect. There was a fairy sound effect. So when I talked, and it was like took my voice really high, and so I had a lot of fun with that pedal, and I could run with that for like 10 minutes easy, and just draw my crowd with that and my arrows, so. Yeah. And
so we got a lot of audible thing going on. Something interesting was audible, and then striking visual objects as well.
Yeah, and I caught a lot, as time went on, I started catching slack from performers like, oh, you're not a real street performer, you're using an amp. And I'm like, but my act, that's what I'm doing. It's like I'm working with this technology, because I was a real tech head back then. And I was walking around with a thing called a Sharp Personal Organizer. It was like the size of a billfold, about this big, and it was about that wide, and it flipped open, and it had a keyboard in it, and you could slide cards in it for, like there was a translation card. And so if you wanted to have German, Italian, French, you could call up an English phrase, and it would show you the German or the French or the Italian. So I had this thing kind of, and it had a notepad, so I could type in every day what happened. So I was sitting on the pitch with, the equivalent of today's phone kind of thing, with people going, well, what's that? And it's like, they were kind of sneering at me, like,
Did you I go, let me show you.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it was a big mix of people who had handheld microphones and, mics on stands. And there was some wireless going on back then. It was kind of the dawn of that age. So,
yeah. And so what was the festival like when you arrived there? Set the scene?
Well, as you get out of the city and you go up the east coast of Australia, you run into all of these tiny towns and villages, Tweed Heads, Ballina, and a bunch of others. And you get to Coffs Harbor, and it's not that big a place. It's got like a main road, but there's no tall buildings, and it's right on the water, and you go to the place where you've been up, the motel. There was a motel, where everybody was staying in drive-in motel kind of accommodation, so you could drive a car up, and there was a pool, and I met there was a circus group there. I think they were called the Acromaniacs or Circomaniacs or something. There was the Juggernauts.
You're right on there.
Yeah, the Juggernauts, Tony and Jeff, doing a male double sort of acrobalance routine. Really, really like powerful stuff. These guys were pumped up, and they were definitely, Gold Coast beach guys, with the short hair and the muscles and the tan.
So is it like a precursor to the English Gents?
Oh, No, well, yeah, I guess, but I think, yeah, I guess you could say that they, they did a lot of jumping on shoulders and let me put this down. It's getting in my way. They did a lot of jumping on shoulders and all the different acro moves that you can pull out, and there was some handsprings and flick flacking and audience volunteers, and the girls loved them. The girls were all over them, kind of thing, because there were these two buff guys, doing their thing. There was Mr. Fungus, Fergus Aiken was there, and I became fast friends with him. He and me just sort of like, we just went thump like this, and found that we were kind of kindred spirits. Who else?
And so were you all in the motel together? They put you all in the same accommodation?
Yeah, we shared accommodation. We had roommates and stuff. And Tony Living Space was there with the beginnings of his act. He was had been working at SeaWorld, but he was breaking out onto the streets for kind of like, well, he'd been a street performer for a while, I guess.
Yeah, but he was doing it too high at one point, if I'm correct in thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, he was young and very, again, everybody so friendly. And I remember this. I asked him because I'd met a girl, at the festival. The festival was 10 days long, and you meet people as you do. Should I be talking about this, Matt Bowden?
Up to you. Of
course, it's up to me. Anything to make the show more interesting. Okay. So yeah, I'd met a girl, and I wanted to go and visit her in her village, which was about 10 minutes drive away. And it was on a slow day, so I think I had one show, and then I was going to go visit her, but I didn't have any way to get there. So I'd asked Tony if I could borrow his van, and I'd never driven on the left-hand side of the road before, or on the right-hand side of the vehicle. So I was like, okay, this is going to be interesting. And I remember it was a beater. It was a real beater of a truck. And I still feel really bad about what happened, because I drove there and didn't think anything. And I saw her, hung out with her for a couple hours, and then I drove back, and I got back to the hotel, and I didn't think. I just got out of the truck and I went to my room. And he came out. I went to give him his keys, and he comes out and he goes, "Why's the back open?" And I went, "The back's open?" And he goes, "Oh no." And he looks inside, and all his gear was gone from the outside, from the back of the truck. And I was just like, "Oh no, what happened?" And it was like the back of the truck, had a faulty latch on it. And he hadn't warned me about it. And I guess I'd gone over a bump, which had released the thing. And I was oblivious to.
So you're driving, and all this equipment's just pouring out of the back.
His suitcase's amp, his mic stand, all fell out of the truck and rolled into a ditch. We drove, we found it. It was there. It was all a happy ending. But I was really embarrassed, and he remained a friend, but at that point he was kind of like, what kind of a dick are you?
Not going to lend you my van anymore.
Yeah, and I think he did actually eventually after. He was the kind of guy he was. He was just, he was sweet, and while he was really pissed off and angry at me, it didn't last. There was no reason to rain on the parade. I felt really bad about it, and maybe drinks, and stuff like that. So anyway,
what was your experience doing shows in the festival then?
Oh, well, it was glorious. Every show was fun. They had me playing in places I hadn't really played before, like in Canadian street festivals. It's all street shows. There weren't any mall shows back then, but this festival was a little bit more advanced, and they had actually gone and sold shows to different strip malls and different commercial locations. So as part of our obligation, we got to do our street shows, which were the big hat earners. And then you had to go to the shopping centers and, just do an act, and we got retainers. That was the other thing, is we all got money to be there. So there was a fee.
So what's the difference? What's the difference between doing a normal street show and doing a mall show? Well,
I guess it comes down to audience volunteers. That's the first thing. That, when you're in a commercial setting, the public will come forward, but it's not as loose and rough as the street. People are a little bit more inhibited, I think. I probably didn't do as well in the malls because we needed things to climb, and I would balance whatever I could find, and everything in the mall was kind of like, bolted down unless we were outside, and then I could find like chairs and stuff. But Um, the
Are you doing a full show with a crowd build and everything in it, or were people kind of waiting to see you?
We did more like group shows. So, the idea is we'd go into these things and there'd be like 6 of us and we'd each go up there and do like 10 minutes. And then there'd be a hat passing, and it was a variety of different things. Sometimes 2 of us would go to a place and try and kick out a full show. The hats were, traditionally smaller than they were in the street festival shows, but that was to be expected. It was a commercial environment. People thought we were being paid and they weren't wrong.
Yeah, exactly that.
Festival was getting money from the place. It was part of our obligation in order to get our fee to go to these places and do these shows and be, ambassadors for the festival. So it was really important to be on your best behavior and not swear and not cross any boundaries, which for some of us was harder than others. And I always tried to be a gentleman in my act, no matter what. So it wasn't so much of a problem for me.
Well, you've also had the experience of working in theatres and working in environments where you have to be good to the clientele because they will come back and see you. It's not like a street show where you go, fuck yeah, I'll get the next crowd.
Yeah.
Which is, something that a street performer can fall into very easily.
It's true. Very true.
So just to get this idea, so the month that you're there, do you spend a month in the street or do you spend 2 weeks in the street and then go to the festival?
Well, I had to be back in Canada to do campus week, which was in February. So I stayed through from September. I stayed there about 5 months. September, October,
the reason I ask is I wanted to talk to you about the development of your act there, but in doing that, I wanted to know how long you spent on the street before the festival. And so we talk about what you developed on the street there and then what you developed on the festival and how things changed.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the reason I was asking.
Yeah, you go to a place like in Sydney, and somebody goes, "Oh, you got to come down to Darling Harbour and try a show there," and you watch everybody else and you see what they do, and you see the difficult draw sometimes for some people, and I don't have a lot of memory of the success of those shows. I just know that I was overwhelmed by it all, and I just went out and did what I could and got the audiences that I could get. I remember that there was a lot of challenge about doing King's Cross, and that there was a guy there named Rusty Balls, and Rusty was like the king of King's Cross. Late night, he'd show up there, and I remember watching him and being so totally blown away, about how rude he was and how audacious he was and how rough it was, and how tattered he looked.
So what do you mean when you say rude? Is he showing fingers to people? Is he eloquently telling them they're dickheads? Like, how does this roughness show itself?
Well, it's a late night crowd, so people are drunk, people are abusive, there's hecklers, and he was living in that environment, so he did what he had to do to get the audiences to pay him, and sometimes he had to go over the top, and sometimes he had to deal with people that were really not gonna let him do it, and that was part of, from my perspective as a theater person, I would watch this and go, wow, this is fascinating. He's got 16 people, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then there'd be this, this rush, and he'd end up with 40 or 50 people as, a bar let out or something like that. And then he was like, back to just doing it again for 4 people. I mean, he was relentless, and
what did he do? Is he a musician? Was he a
juggler? Rusty Ball. Yeah, he was a juggler. He did.
I don't know the chap. Maybe explain his show a little bit.
Oh, well, when I arrived in Australia, one of the things I did notice was a large volume of acts that were pretty much identical in shape, form, and appearance. So what they did for their content, the lines they used, there was a lot of shared stuff. And I came to understand that Captain Kino had shown up back in the, Expo 88 was a big time there. And that's kind of when street theater exploded, when everybody was invited down. I didn't go there. I was at Expo 86, but I didn't I didn't think even to try to go. Yeah. Which
was 86 in Canada. Am I right in thinking that?
1986 was Vancouver, Canada. And then they took it in 1988, they took it to Australia, Sydney, Australia. And it was every performer in the world was there except me. I had other things to do. I guess I was doing other things. It was my theater company had just closed in that year, and I was kind of down in the dumps. I probably didn't feel like it, and I wasn't ready. As a performer, I needed time, so I wasn't in a creative space enough to actually be ready to be put on that stage. So,
but you think that festival, that expo, because so many young people had seen that and seen the great stuff there and tried to emulate it, it became this kind of set structure and style and content of work.
well, no, the way I heard it was that Captain Kino had shown up and was essentially franchising a show. So he went around the country, found performers who were interested in learning and then introduced them to a generic act. And I remember, as time went on and I hung out in Australia, I was like, have I seen this guy already? No, I haven't. He's this city's version of that act, and
I will say this, just to give credit to Kino, Captain Kino, franchise maybe isn't the right word. He didn't ever, as far as I know, ask for money. You might have to give him a few beers.
Oh, no. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that he like asked. No, he was very generous in terms of, you want to do this? I'm not going to try and imitate Captain Kino. You want to do this? Here's the stock. Here's the standard lines. Here's the tricks you do. Here's how you deal with volunteers. Here's this, and this, and this, and this. So he really had a blueprint, is what I should say. He gave out an open source blueprint for street shows.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people picked it up, and it just, I think this is the problem, is once you've got that blueprint and it works, by God, it's hard to move away from it because you get so much love for it. It feels good and you make money at doing it. Yeah. So it's actually counter to every instinct that you've got developed in your mind to move away from that, because the more you move away from it initially, the crapper the show becomes.
Yeah, well, as my time in Australia unfolded, this phenomenon became one of the things that came up a lot, and we can get into that later, because there was quite a the 90s for me in Australia were perhaps the best years of my life. I mean, I showed up there, I was like 30 years old, and then I stayed there until I was 45. And the things that happened in that time, the evolution of street performance, how things changed, what I had got, the opportunities that I got. And that was kind of one of the things that came out of Coffs Harbour, which put me in a different place than a lot of performers. Was they gave us a fee, but they also gave out prizes. And 3 prizes were given away. There was a People's Choice Award, there was for Best Act, there was a Festival Award for Best Act, and a Chamber of Commerce Award for Best Act. And each of these awards came with a $3,000 prize. So we really cashed in at this festival. It was 10 days long, and there was always shows in the day and shows in the evening, and the hats were massive. And not to talk about money, because we're not supposed to do that, but I have to be honest that I'm going to talk about the money, because that first week was just so major. I had never, I'd never seen that kind of money except at Halifax. Halifax was huge. Edmonton was huge, but the 10 days in a small place like this, and
do you think it's because people are excited because this was new and it was vibrant and people just wanted to buy into it because it had the myth to it?
Yeah, it was fresh, and it was like I think they'd done it a couple of years before, like they had like previous versions of it.
And the Expo 88 would be one of them. And then I assume that little things popped up after that. When I was talking to Dom, it seemed like after these things, stuff started popping up from people who just moved out from those festivals and saw this festival and thought, this is cool.
Yeah,
we want this in Australia.
Yeah, I think so. And it was like if Expo 88 happened, it was entirely possible that Coffs Harbour put on its first festival in 89, and then 90. And then I was there, and I think it was its 3rd version. I can't verify that.
So,
but
do you remember who won the awards? And I assume the awards were the People's Choice by the people watching the shows, the Festival's Choice, and the choice of the governors, or the kind of the civic infrastructure.
Yeah, there was another Canadian there named Jeff Bradley, and he picked up the Festival Award. There was the Juggernauts, who picked up the People's Choice Award, and I got the Chamber of Commerce Award. So we each got $3,000 on top of our retainer and our hats. So you can just imagine, after like being in the country for like 3 weeks, I was so loaded, man. I was like on the moon. I was like, okay, I'm going to be okay this winter. It's going to be great.
Yeah. And just out of interest, why do you think those 3 shows won in those 3 respective fields, the respective awards?
Well, the Juggernauts were obvious because they were a huge crowd pleaser. They were like a pop band, you know. They were like Wham, you know. They were the Wham of street performing, except they didn't sing. They did this bodybuilding act, and they were, you know, they were blokes. They were real funny blokes, and they were just muscular and acrobatic and springy, and so I'm pretty sure they got the People's Choice Award just because of all the girls that voted for them, you know.
And then, why do you think a fellow Canadian got the festival award then?
He had a pirate styled act, so he was dressed like a swashbuckler, and he was also very charming. And he did a box number that was really quite innovative, and he was funny. He had the long curly blonde hair, and he was handsome, you know. So once again, he was a favorite from just a showman point of view. He was just really a professional showman, and he and I were friends at that stage and had known each other. And you know, we kind of, from the minute we arrived at the festival, you know, Fergus Aiken and Jeff Bradley and the Juggernauts, we were all kind of like going out together and clubbing and stuff like that. So
you became a little boss. Do you think because of he had tight craft, and you used the word ingenuity, he had an ingenuitive show, and that was what the festival picked up on? Is there something a bit different here? Just people in the future who want to know what festival people might like.
Yeah,
I
mean, he was like a lot of performers, a lot of us, that there was a formula to his act, and there was, you know, he had some of his own original lines, which, you know, set him apart from some of the other shows that were there. I mean, the Juggernauts were big on using a lot of stock lines and, you know, a lot of stock audience interactivity stuff. But, you know,
the audience don't know about. They've got audiences have very little idea of stock.
Yeah, and particularly back then, it was like, well, Expo 88 had introduced a lot of talent. I mean, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of performers had been there. So as it started to spread out around the country, it was like a new idea, and they'd never heard the lines before. So it was very possible that they thought.
But even if they had, in 3 years' time, they've probably forgotten them. You know, it's a lot for us. We see it every day, but they see it once every how many years, you know?
Yeah, that's true. It's very true that, you know,
and
even to this day.
Sorry. Can I bring this one as well? For you winning this kind of civic award, do you think that's because you did a show which came from civic funding? You know, not specifically, but you worked most of your life getting civic funding and working in state-funded theatre. And do you think that flavour maybe carried through, and that they felt that?
I can't really say. I guess the City Council Award came with an additional prize. And this is kind of the thing that set me up in Australia, was that I guess the Chamber of Commerce was looking for a representative to help install street performing in other places. So the job that I got was to be the artist coordinator for the city of Gold Coast, where I got a fee to not only do my show like all the performers, but I got a fee to oversee the scheduling, to make sure that people got their accommodation, which was given to them when they came to the Gold Coast. And I was asked to put the groundwork in place for a festival. So I guess they'd looked at my resume or something like that and seen that I'd had this kind of experience, and that maybe what you're suggesting is right, that my theatricality and the, you know, my publicity and the way that I was conducting myself was reminiscent of, this is a street performer who can speak to the people who are going to finance these things, you know?
Yeah.
And I knew
Rather
how to
than
speak the
somebody who looks
language.
like he smoked 3 joints and had 5 beers and gone, right, let's go do this.
Yeah, you know, I was always nicely dressed, and, you know, I had suits that I wore and stuff. And not to say that everybody didn't, but, you know, that coming from Canada, that was how I was able to get myself solo, was by presenting a professional front to what I did, you know. And so that was a thing that took me to the Gold Coast after that, and I went up there and stayed there, and then I had to come back to Canada in February.
Well, before you come back, when you're down at the Gold Coast, you've just got this thing, you just set up to organise festivals, you're feeling really good. You said, I feel like I'm set up.
Yeah.
So what's the journey after that to the Gold Coast, and how is it arriving at the Gold Coast? And I assume you work on helping set stuff up from that.
Well, one of the cool things that comes out of the festival is that, and I'd never encountered this before, was that when the festival finished, you could go to, Byron Bay, and the Steve Scott had gone around to all of these places as the producer of the festival and gotten bars, and bars had they had beer gardens, and kids were in families were in these beer gardens. So that was very cool that you could go to a bar, and then in the back was a big beer garden where the kids could play, and there was like a play area for the kids, and they would book shows. So they would come and they'd give us like $100 each. 3 or 4 of us would show up, and we'd go to this place. They'd give us a place to stay for the night and a meal in the restaurant. And then we'd go out and we'd do a $100 retainer show plus the hat. And people were drunk, so they were like, here, take my money. So sometimes those shows are even more lucrative than any street show because people have just been plied with alcohol, and we're just so enthusiastic to see us.
Yeah.
So
there was something interesting in their local bevy, their local bar.
Yeah,
that must be something exciting, because usually they only chat to each other. It's like, oh, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, well, every bar was a different experience, and Byron Bay was one of the more pleasurable ones because it was a very sort of green community, and there was a lot of new age people and a lot of hippies and a lot of back to earth people. So they were totally up for it, and then you'd go to some of the bars where we'd take our $100, we'd do our show, and then we'd just leave because obviously these guys weren't up for it, and they were just like, it was like a yabo bar or something like that. But
I imagine the thing of like at the beginning of Bugsy Malone, and the piano stops playing when somebody walks in. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly like that. So that was it. He lined up these places, and you came to understand that as you were traveling from one city to the other on your own, that this would be something you could do. That Steve and the festival had kind of planted these seeds in the minds of the bar owners, that if a performer shows up, he could get a room, he could get a meal, he could get $50 or $100 to do a show either in the bar or outside if the weather was good. And that to me was, that was paradise. It was paradise.
Wow, mate, that's lovely.
Yeah.
And so when you got there to the Gold Coast, you started helping organize these festivals.
Well, it was the Gold Coast was already doing street performers, and it was pretty much a 7-day-a-week thing. And the manager of the Gold Coast, what was it, Cavill Avenue Mall, had a budget from the city because it was good for tourism to have the street performers on the mall. And if the street performers are on the mall and getting paid to be there, there could be a schedule and there would always be a rotation. I think it was pretty loose in the early days, and that's why they wanted to get somebody in there who could talk to the performers, and that's kind of
halfway point kind of thing.
Yeah,
you've worked in professional industries, but you've also worked on the street as well.
Yeah, and that was the thing, is that they wanted a person who had some street experience, could answer the needs of the performers, because it was a performer himself, and I fit that bill, and so I was essentially, my boss, Brendan, was the guy that paid them. He let me know, what the rules were, and what the city ordinances were, and I kind of had to just sort of, surf the attitudes of the performers. And there was a lot of doubt and mistrust about me because they say, well, you can't be both. You can't be an organizer and a performer. And I was like, why not? I'm sorry. I've been given this, and I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to do it, and it opened a lot of doors for me that, I did that until I think I went back to Canada. I came back and I did it.
Just before we move on, really interested in the doubts of the performers. I'm interested in the culture of the performers there when you arrived, and perhaps the cynicisms maybe.
Well, it's a delicate subject to talk about because, Matt, I don't really like to trowel
just in broad terms. You don't have to mention names, but just the general atmosphere.
Okay. There had been another Canadian who'd come down before, and had been a sort of a holdover from Expo 88, and he was doing work in Brisbane, and there had been some controversy about his attention to local artists, Australian artists. It's really hard to talk about because I don't want
Can I make this easier for you so you don't have to mention names? Just broad subject matters. There's always a thing when I've gone to any pitches, even Covent Garden, where you talk to performers there, say, hey, let's do a festival, let's do something, make a big thing. It'll be good for all of us. And they, we don't want to bring these bloody foreign acts in and do it. We want our place. They always come and replace us.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of ownership and maybe potentially a lack of vision past one's own reach, in these situations.
Yeah, the thing that had come to me was that performers, Australian performers, were disgruntled about their position in the state of things because of a foreigner who had come in and had given focus to international acts at locally financed events. So they felt that they weren't getting the money, they weren't getting the profile. You know what they say, you're never a prophet in your own land. At least that's what they used to say, that if you wanted to make it, you had to go away. And that's what I had done. I'd done my thing in Canada, but as a Canadian, there was only so much I was going to be able to do. And in Canada, we had English people and American people running our events, and it was just like, okay, I guess that's the way. I'm going to go over there and be the foreign guy, and I'll try and get those kinds of jobs because that's what I was trained to do. And I remember, having to work really hard to gain the trust of the performers. There was a lot of doubt, it's like, oh no, not another one, who's coming here to do this. And
how did you do that then? How did you combat the obstacles in front of you?
It was a daily thing. I had my allies, I had my detractors, and you have to accept that, haters gonna hate. That there's
was there a specific thing? Did you say, okay, I am going to pay attention to local acts and I am going to give you this place?
Because that as a man who had come from a cultural background and working in theaters with socially responsible subject material, I had a genuine interest in becoming a part of the community, and I really try. I worked hard to say I'm going to work hard at bringing this community together and doing what I can to raise the profile, and you run in, even, as an organizer, I would run into the argument from, the people who finance the things, the commercial people, who was like, well, we want to get somebody in here who's like, the public is going to come and see because they're not from here. And you kind of go, as soon as you start talking to these people about bringing in local acts, they go, well, everybody's seen that act, and you're like, okay, how about this? We do a quota system, that for every foreigner we bring in, we do 3 local acts, and we create, a kind of a finite possibility so that the local performers and the other performers from around the country get their chances. And that's really kind of what I started doing later on. This first opportunity in the Gold Coast was a rough and ready thing that I didn't have much say over anything that the performers did. It was just that I had to make sure that there was a schedule, that there was fairness in the schedule. So there was no draw. It was me drafting a schedule based on the number of performers that we had and putting.
How did you make that fair then? It's a lot of respect. I mean, people who don't do street shows might not understand this, but with street shows, one of the great things about street shows on a street pitch is, generally speaking, at least from what I've experienced, there's a certain amount of even equity between everybody. If there's a draw, you've got a draw from a hat. You pick a number from a hat, or it's a random number generator now. And it's an even crack at the whip. If it's a queue, you turn up earliest, you get the show. If you're in the queue, you get a go. It's all very fair. The minute you stop programming, how the hell do you make that fair?
Well, it's important to understand that there had been something that had occurred in the Gold Coast before I got there, which had changed the landscape quite substantially. And the reason, I think, why I was given the job was that there had been an accident and somebody had gotten injured, and the city had been forced to pay out an insurance claim based on this, and it went around the world pretty much after that had happened, that this thing had happened. And there, when I was given the brief to do the job, it was that these performers could come, but there had to be a rotation. And the rotation had to make certain that if it was a Friday night, that if somebody got an 8 o'clock, that the next week they wouldn't get the 8 o'clock. It would go to somebody else. And so, if a performer stayed in the country, in Gold Coast long enough, they would end up at 8 o'clock, no matter what their caliber, of act. They were entitled in the rotation to get an 8 o'clock show. You also
I
had
take it the 8 o'clock is the best show there. That's why you
8
mentioned.
o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, those night shows. And so everybody, in those days, there was, we'd start, the shows would, be in the middle of the afternoon, and it was blistering hot at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And somebody would be registered to do a 1 o'clock show and be like, oh, yeah, geez, and they wouldn't get a good show that day because that was their rotation. And people didn't like that. And I had to suffer it. But that was my brief. And that was, what I was being paid to do. Was to.
Were you confident that it was fair? Did you make sure that the rotation meant that no one get left out? Was that something that you felt important?
I actually had been doing work with databases earlier on, to run my theater company. When we got our Mac, for example, I'd gotten into how to use a database, and by 1991 I had a Macintosh 165C with a FileMaker Pro document on it. So I was able to create a profile for each artist. I was able to map all of the available time slots. And then what I did is I assigned performers numbers, and then I would feed them into my database, and the database would generate an even distribution of the number of spaces that I had. And I made sure that it was an even number according to the number of performers, so that everybody got to do each spot at each time. And I could call up a performer's name, and it would print up, and it would have their schedule on it, and people could come compare it and go, why did he get I got one too, but and it was like, and it was Gold Coast. So the shows are pretty much great, most of the time, except, Schooley's Week was a madhouse.
What's Schooley's Week?
Oh, that was when, it was like the kids get out of school.
Is it like what Americans would call spring break?
Yeah, it's like that, and the beach is awash with teenagers and people getting drunk and spewing everywhere, and families coming and everything. So that was a part of the thing. Yeah.
And suppose I haven't asked this yet, but what were the pitches like there?
Well, we had the Cavill Avenue Mall, and when I got there, they had the shows were happening kind of in the center area of the mall, which was quite short. It was only 2 blocks long. And that was really the only place we could play. Our producer, Brendan, would sometimes get shows at another shopping center. So the same kind of thing would go on, that he would go and produce shows at other venues to try and do what he could to give the performers extra money and opportunities. So that was a real vibe that was going on back then, from what I can remember. And, if it was too crowded or performers weren't happy with what they were getting, then they'd just go back down the coast and play at Tweed Heads or in Ballina, or at the pub at Byron, and head to Sydney, or head to Melbourne, or head to Adelaide, or fly to Perth, and Brisbane, because it had Expo 88, had become quite a regulated place, and Gold Coast was, I think, 70 kilometers from Brisbane, so it was kind of like a satellite city. Brisbane was up the coast a little bit and a little bit more inland, and then Gold Coast was like right on the water. So there was that pitch, and I know that there were some acts like Nick Nicholas was there, and Gazzo was there the year I showed up, and other acts that had been there for Expo 88 had already kind of worked out that they could work in a corner somewhere and do their table act. So there were pitches that got opened up.
And was that okay with people? Were people fine with the idea of people fly pitching around the sort of side of the main pitch?
You couldn't really control it, you could. I mean, street performers being who they are, particularly guys like Gazzo and Nick, it's like, I'm going to go and do that, and it's like, what are you going to do? You got to stop him, and it's like, he's doing that, it's blind, I'm not getting my crowd, he's got a crowd. I'm like, yeah, what?
Be better.
Yeah, this is the pitch. This is what I'm organizing. I don't have any jurisdiction over there,
And did people accept you in the end? Did the family sort of bring you in?
Well, like I said, man, I spent from 1991 to 2005, and then I went back in 2007 in Australia. And what happened?
So, I mean, specifically as you as an organizer, were you organizing the Gold Coast at all over that time?
I think I did that. Like I came out of Coffs Harbour, went to Gold Coast, was there until my winter tour of campuses in Canada. So I flew back for like 6 weeks to do these campus shows because I was a bit of an installation in the campus system during orientation week, and then halfway through the year in the middle of winter, they brought guys like me into the campuses to do interactive stuff with the university students, and I developed a real solid university show that was an indoor show. I did my flying act. I wasn't doing my flying act just then, but my style of street performer translated to a stage quite well, and
you're used to presenting stuff on stage as well because you've done all this theatre work.
Yeah. So, and then I organized also a bunch of comedy clubs that I could do while I was doing my campus shows. So I turned that 6 weeks into a money spinner and then flew back to Australia, as soon as I could to spend, I think I was there until May. And then, the Gold Coast thing kind of wound itself up. I'm trying to remember. I was working on a thing called the Gold Coast Comedy Wave, and we were trying to get a street performers festival, and I was trying to produce money. I had to work with some people in Brisbane who didn't want it to happen, and it was like my producer was like, you got to make this happen. They're doing a street theater festival. We want a street theater festival. I go, yeah, but I really want to be able to share acts, and maybe we could share expenses. And when I went and talked to their producing team, they're like, nope, stay away. We don't want it. If people are we're doing this to bring people to our festival. And I was just like, okay, so I ran into a lot of obstacles in terms of being able to.
So it wasn't brothers in arms then?
No. You have to understand. It's like there's, street theater and street performing is a competitive, and in Australia it was a business. It wasn't like Canada where it popped up in the summer. This was there, because as you got further north, it was warm, like even in winter time. You could be up in the Gold Coast in the middle of winter and it'd be like 22 degrees. So, there was always a chance. The rainy, windy season, of course, things wouldn't happen, but it was still hot and humid.
But when you say street performing was a kind of competitive thing, are you talking about the performers? Are you talking about the festival organizer? I'm
talking about everything, man. I'm talking about everything. It's like when a guy like Steve Scott goes and does what he does, organizing other smaller towns, and other producers look at it as a money spinner and go, okay, I can do that too. And so, you end up with new producers coming up and looking at it from a commercial point of view and how can they generate a profit. That there isn't always the heartfelt social, I want to do good things for street performers point of view. It's like, this is for commerce, this is for tourism, this is for boosting the revenues of our traders in the area. And the reason that the Chamber of Commerce is putting money into this is to find out if it's going to increase the number of people buying stuff in the stores.
So is this the thing of, do you find friendliness and brotherhood on this spreadsheet? No, you don't.
Oh, dude, I don't know. This is getting complicated now. Australia was a complicated time. I have to tell you what, I have to continue the story because I have to tell you what happened next. Okay. Because I was working in the Gold Coast. I went back to Canada for the summer to do the summer tour. And while I was there, I went to Edinburgh where I met the director of the Melbourne Comedy Festival. His name was Lloyd Warland. He was newly appointed by the Melbourne Comedy Festival to take over this 3-week festival. And
Fringe. When you went to Edinburgh, you're doing the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Yeah. I was there. Okay. I was there doing a show. I'd met a guy named Rex Boyd, and we were also doing a double act. So I had my solo act. He had his act, Rex Boyd Superstar, and then we'd created an act called Fritz and Otto Get Funkified, and we were starting to try and storm the world with a double act. So we'd show up on pitches together in Canada, and we'd each do a solo act, and then we'd get together and do our double act. So we were,
Was Rex doing his because he does a Robin Hood show? This kind of what he's been known for over time, right?
Yeah, he wasn't doing that back then. He was doing his juggling act, and all those sort of things came later, And so
how was your double act? I mean, I feel bad tearing you away from talking about the Melbourne Festival coming from Edinburgh, but what was, because you've gone together as a double act. He's a juggler now. Is he doing kind of a power show? And by power show, hyping the crowd, lots of responses.
I don't think Rex is. I haven't heard of Rex doing shows in some time. and he'd be an interesting guy to get on your show to hear his take on things. He used to go to the
I'd love to,
Covent
man.
Garden and climb up those columns. I remember there was another act he did that. I can't remember his name, but Rex did it too, and he was just like his legs split, out to the sides like this one, ding, 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 all the way up to the top.
Are you sure that's Covent Garden? Because
not Covent Garden. It was at Edinburgh. It was at Edinburgh.
Oh, yeah, Edinburgh, exactly. Because Covent Garden columns are about 15 foot apart. And I don't know how tall you are.
No, I was.
But yes, I've seen pictures of those columns, and they get like 30 feet up in the end. It's scary.
Yeah. So it's quite something. He and I met at the Halifax Festival, I think in 1991. That summer I went back to work in Canada, and I'd landed. There was another guy who, because I'd been at Halifax, he had contacted me, Rick Armstrong, and he was the producer of what was probably Toronto's first street performers festival, 10 days long. It was called the Toronto Circle Ball Fair. And it wasn't just buskers. He actually, he engaged me to be the artistic liaison. So I was essentially traveling around the country. He called me and said, yeah, I hear you're doing this thing and and you organize stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And he goes, well, listen, I'm putting on a festival, in August, and I need some acts. And I'm wondering, if I pay you, will you, book the acts and contract them and take care of it? I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. So I'd gotten this gig after working on the Gold Coast to do this thing for this guy, Rick Armstrong. And what he'd done is he'd made a fortune by taking over a walkway in between Bloor Street, which is, one of the major streets in Toronto, and then Yorkville Avenue, which was like a chic upmarket walking area, right? And
promenade,
a promenade. But it was really like high-end stores, like the big brands, and he had gotten permission to create a walkway from Bloor Street to Yorkville Avenue, where he put in all of these light boxes, and he put in art. So for like 6 months, he put in some of the most amazing art in these things, and then he attracted a lot of attention, and then little by little,
paintings and sculptures and kind of
there were like recessed boxes
stuff.
Yeah, really, really, cool, high-end visual art. And he wasn't messing around. And what he did is he got the attention of all of the money people in the Yorkville area, Bloor Yorkville area, who then started going, I want to put a display in, and he would rent them these boxes. And so he produced, literally thousands of dollars a week just from renting these boxes out. And he got enough money together that he was able to put on a festival, get it funded by the city, by the Yorkville people. And it was a 10-day festival. We had 33 artists. And then there was in the A program, which I had to book. And he had some requests about special acts he wanted. Like he wanted a guy named Monty Kasten, who was this Czech performance artist. And I wrote about it. I wrote about this story actually in my book, The Pavement Stage, that he put this
from Amazon.
No, it's not actually. You can only get it from me. So if you want the book, you got to order it from me.
We'll put the website in the description at the end of the show.
Sure, yeah. It's there. It's been out since 2012, and it documents 30 years. And these stories are in there. But this particular story was really defining for me, because I'd been asked to book all the acts, and he had sent me to check out Monty Kasten, and I looked at all Monty's stuff, and I went, dude, if you book this guy, we're going to have huge controversy, and the logistics of doing what he wants to do. He wants to set things on fire in the street. We're going to have to get fire trucks and police officers. I'm going to have to
hang on a minute. People set stuff on fire, like juggling clubs.
No. This was different. This guy, when you watched his videos, he had huge oil drums with flammables in them, and there was like 16 of them. He needed 2 city blocks. And so Rick says to me, he goes, I don't care about controversy. I want you to schedule this guy. I went,
was the controversy because of the fire, or is that something else?
No, it was because the performance artist was a confronting artist, that when it came to doing an outdoor performance, he was European in style, and Canadians weren't used to this, that this kind of stuff went on in Europe all the time. And this was kind of my first taste of a European styled artist working in the streets and not
And
being
when
a
you say
busker.
confronting, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Sure. I booked the act and I got the technical rider, and I had to get like 3 fire trucks. I had to have fire perimeter, like, you know.
Just before you go on, you said
Yeah.
confronting. Is it confronting because it's a lot of fire, or is it confronting because of the content of the material?
The
Is
content
he
of
doing?
the content of the show was confrontational. The show started with a big milk truck arriving in the middle of this intersection that we had closed off. So 1 block in either direction with barricades around the whole thing so that people could not enter the street. I had a fire truck at each entry place. I had 4 police cars, and I had to have 24 police officers on this site for this particular show because we had shown the city what we were going to do. The truck arrives, the back of the doors of the truck open, and all of these performers get out. I guess there's about 8 of them, and they're wearing jumpsuits, and they're looking very dystopian, very utilitarian, you know. And then they start rolling out these oil drums, and they start placing them, 5-10 meters apart, and then they start putting down corrugated iron in between, corrugated plates of iron down in between these things, and they start taking flammables and pouring it onto the corrugated steel so that it's holding the fuel. But you're sitting there going, okay, we know that he's setting these things on fire, but we didn't have any idea what was going to happen. So everything's out, and he's got music playing from these things, these speakers coming off the top of the truck. He gets up on the top, he's got like a mohawk, and he's sitting there with a one of those megaphones, and he starts going, don't talk to me, don't look at me, don't ask me things, don't fuck with me. And the audience is going, what's going on? And he just starts spewing expletives, and his whole thing is to try and bring the crowd to a frenzy. And pretty soon, and then at one point they light these things on fire, and you've got this huge amount of fire going off, and you've got this guy screaming at the audience through a megaphone, hurling insults, and telling them that they're puppets, and that they're robots, and that they're commercial. I mean, it was like, I'm sure that the people of Bloor Yorkville loved it because that's the way that echelon of people work. They want to push people's buttons because it attracts attention, and the press, was there to report on it, and it was a massive story. And
I suppose this thing as well, that it's quite a rush to have someone be so, as you said, confrontational, verbally violent and theatrically violent, but in a controlled way where they can feel safe going, oh my God, isn't this a verging experience going on?
That's the next thing that happened, was that I'm standing at my control point where I've got I've got the lead policeman beside me. I've got the lead fireman beside me. They're on their radios. And at one point, and Rick's not too far away from me, and at one point, I get the directive from the police officer. He goes, this has to stop now, because people were yelling back, and it looked as though we were going to lose the containment of the barricades. And I went up to Rick, and I said, Rick, we have to stop this. And he goes, well, then go stop it. And I went up I had to enter into the thing, it was my job. I'm like, there's thousands of people, there's probably 10,000 people in this.
Do you think these people are going to turn, or is the show going as it should? Do you think the show's going as it should?
I had never encountered this before. And later on in my career, when I went to Europe, I saw a tradition of these large scale shows where the sensibilities of a European audience are a lot different than a North American audience. Europe was destroyed in the Second World War. And so the theatricality of something like that kind of gets greeted with oh yeah, whatever. You haven't seen a village that's been completely bombed to shit and rebuilt. It's like, yawn, another guy setting things on fire and yelling at the public. But, there was other forms of, large scale shows like Les Piétons and Noir and Jaune and Caraboche. There are these massive companies financed by the state with huge ensembles of 35, 50 people, materia prima, people that specialized in taking over city squares, doing shows for 10, 15,000 people with massive production values because it was outdoor performance, and this guy was kind of that ilk. But I believe he had been booked by Rick because Rick knew that it was going to create controversy, and controversy was going to help him sell advertising for the next year.
Is the word right? Spectacle. It was going to be a spectacle.
It was a spectacle. And as he was a genius. This guy, was putting on events all the time that were pushing buttons, getting press for it. And because he had this walkway with advertising, he just kept upping the price of these boxes. So they were going
the more prevalent
$5,000 a box to have your stuff there for a week, and stuff like that.
So you're walking into this show, okay? There's a huge, entertainer standing on a milk quote with the thing screaming and noise. They're screaming back,
banging on the oil drums, and they're making music, by beating on these flaming drums. And I'm like, well, this is really great. But I go up to him and I yell, I go, Monty, you gotta stop, And he looks right down at me with the megaphone and goes, this doesn't stop until you make me stop. And I'm like, you have to stop. And he goes, you have to come here and stop me. And I'm like, oh God. And so I can't. I get to the truck, and I go back to Rick, and I say, Rick, he won't stop. And so Rick goes out there and is, because I can see that Rick's kind of going like this because the police are going, come on, this has got to stop. I'm getting pressure from the fire department, pressure from the police. My producer.
Is it actually dangerous, or are they just worried about the crowd turning? Or
they were worried about, I think they were mostly worried about the crowd turning, but also the amount of fire that was going on. There was, there was a thing is that Monty was still yelling, and the fire and the flames were starting to go down because the flammables were starting to, get expended. And I remember watching Rick go out there, and Monty came down off the truck to talk to him. So there was a relationship between these guys that I really wasn't aware of. And it's when it dawned on me that Rick goes, now you have to stop. And Monty goes, okay, I'm stopping now because you've stopped me. And that was the theater. That here was a guy challenging authority, challenging public perception. Rick was the host of this idea. And in order for it to stop, the man with the money had to give the directive to stop the thing. I couldn't do it. It had to be a visual confrontation of organization versus anarchist. And that's when I kind of went, oh, he staged this whole thing, And then by the time that happened, the flames were down and the performance was over. And the police were like, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to need you to disperse, and stuff like this. And it was just the appearance of our police infrastructure and the lights of the vehicles and stuff like this was it was so theatrical that I felt like Rick had kind of manipulated the city, the officials, the infrastructure support team into putting on one of the best shows I've ever seen, and the controversy it created in terms of the press. What should the public be exposed to? What kind of limits should we allow on our streets? Should we be like the Europeans? And, Canada's street scene was, jugglers and vaudevillians. And the closest we had to that, to a European scene was in Quebec, which had its liaison with France. And so the French of Quebec knew about the French scene, and a lot of the Quebecois would go over to Europe. But the Anglophones stayed, in their comfort zone with their style. So that was the Toronto Circle Ball Fair. And then from there, I went to Edinburgh after that, and I met this guy, Lloyd Warland.
So just before Lloyd Warland, just before we get to this, and I hate to keep dragging you back, you double act with Rex Boyd, who we hope to get on the show very soon.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you do. He's a really great guy. I love him dearly. We started off just doing, what a lot of performers do when you meet up and you feel, you feel like this guy's like you. Like he liked to dance in his show, and I was all dancey floppy, and it was a lot of other performers said you two should really get together and do an act. He was always nicely dressed, and I was always nicely dressed, and it just seemed like it was going to be a match, made, in heaven kind of thing. And so in the beginning we were just merging our acts as you do. And I wasn't a
You
very
take a bit of this, I'll take a bit of that.
yeah, and we'll juggle some clubs together. I'm not a very good club juggler, but I could, and because of him, I got better at it. And he was the flash juggler, and I was the goofy, jumpy, aroundy comedy guy, I guess. But he was funny in his own right. It was
Did
just
you have did he play the straight guy and you were the fall guy kind of thing? Was this how it, because it's a classic comedy structure with that?
I don't know. I think we were two gentlemen that were just well, two guys, two crazy guys. We were just two crazy guys. There was no real structure beyond us bringing our personalities of our solo shows together and finding that it worked. And when we decided, he went and choreographed a dance number, and he goes, "Let's learn this." And we did it to um uh and Right Said Fred. And there was another
I'm too sexy for my shirt.
I'm too sexy for my shirt. There was another piece of music. He picked some music and did some choreography, and we decided to do this choreography. And around what we did is we put it in a container. So we decided that our double act would be two German scientists called Fritz and Otto. So we wore these long white lab coats, and we came up with an experiment. And the experiment was going to be, why are you talking like Arnold Schwarzenegger? And you're like, what is the only reference I have for German accents? And we come up like German, we come up with all these jokes. Like he would stand on my shoulders and we would juggle fire torches. And so as these scientists, we came up with a concept, and it was like, doctor. He'd say doctor. I go Fritz. He'd go Dr. Fritz, because I was Dr. Otto von Schmengi and he was Fritz Oppenheimer and he was my lab assistant. So I was the world-renowned astrophysicist and part-time psychiatrist. And we would do these things. He'd say, Doctor, Fritz, if we take this apple and we shake it up, will it taste better? And I go, why don't we find out, And so we'd come up with this whole juggling routine around the eating of the apple. And it was like, we'd be doing these things, shaking it. And eventually he'd take a bite and he'd be like, oh, the apple tastes so much better. Here, you try. And so we did a shared apple eating routine, as part of as these doctors. And then we had a lab thing we did to sound effects, and it was like all pre-recorded. So we had to go through the sound effects routine, a laboratory experiment. And then the idea is that, well, if we shake up the apple and it makes the apple taste better, if we shake up ourselves, will it make us look better? And so what we did is we started doing this juggling act and bouncing around and stuff like this until finally there's a transformation a la Jekyll and Hyde, and our costumes, our lab costumes come off, and we're wearing these baseball jerseys and baseball cap backwards, and we're hip-hop guys, and we're doing good vibration. We're doing the dance was good vibrations, and this choreography that boy band choreography that Rex had put together, and it just made us crowd favorites, because we were doing all this stuff, and push-ups on the ground and kicks, and it was all really nicely choreographed. And then the show ended with us being funky. The show was called Fritz and Otto Get Funkified, and
were you happy working with a partner again? Because when you work in the theatre, it's immensely collaborative, I assume.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you've come back from being a solo artist for a long time to working with someone else and bouncing off them again.
Yeah, and we spent, I guess, having met at the Halifax Festival, we started getting together. We did one gig together in Milwaukee Summerfest. It was really my only time that I appeared in America in my entire career. It got me into trouble later, actually, because, when you're a young performer, you want to have international credits on your resume. So he said, come to Milwaukee, I live here, and I get us a gig at Summerfest. And I was like, cool. And it was like, there was no talk of me getting a visa, which is a Canadian you have to have if you're going to work in the States. But I wasn't going to get any money. There wasn't going to be a contract. It wasn't going to be my name. I was just going to perform at the event. He was going to get the money. It was just going to be a chance for us to show up, maybe shoot some videotape and get some more experience and put it on the resume. That's the thing. You want to put it on the resume. And I remember that there was a time, I think it was maybe the next summer, that I was trying to cross the border around Vancouver to come into the States, and they stopped me. They opened up my trunk. They took out my briefcase, and they said to me they put me in a room, and they came to me and they said, have you ever worked in the United States? And I went, no. And then they open up my briefcase and they pull out my promotional material, which says, Summerfest, Milwaukee, 1990, da da da. And I'm like, uh, oh, well, yeah, I didn't get paid. I was just like, I was doing a thing with my friend, and it was just like, and they were like, and I was like, this close to not being allowed in, and I was sweating, and I was like, but you don't understand. If you don't let me in, and I can't work in the States, I'll never make it in my business. It's like, and it was like, they let me go, but it was like, I think there was something in my record or something like that. There was something that went on. But it was just like, wow, okay. So that was the only thing I did with Rex there. And then we did some Canadian festivals, and we were awarded Best Act at the Kingston Buskers Rendezvous, which was a great Canadian thing. So we got that thing. And
so the thing I drew you back from multiple times, Edinburgh. You go to Edinburgh.
I went to Edinburgh with Rex to do Fritz and Otto Get Funkified. We rented a space. It was kind of like we wanted to do not an indoor show, but a semi-indoor show. So I can't remember the place we booked, but it was a small garden space, up on the Royal Mile, and we bought, we paid for the advertising in the program and bought ads and spent money, and we were pretty much down at the Mound every day, making money there and going up and losing money.
Sounds like a silly thing to say, but I have to say this. I know what it is, but what's the Mound?
The Mound? What's the Mound? Well, that's that, the place where all the street performers go at Edinburgh to, kick out shows. It's just this zoo of acts, everybody's everywhere. And
is this in 1992, 93?
92, I believe it was.
So the Royal Mile doesn't have shows in it at the moment. And
no. You got to go up. There's
jungle,
venues.
Yeah, the name was given down the Mound.
The jungle. That's right. You go down to the jungle, and it's been a long time, Matt. If I get some of my details mixed up, please feel free to correct me.
It's fine.
But yeah, we discovered my Edinburgh experience was kind of like, I kind of went, I don't know why I'm here. I'm making more money on the street than I am in my show. And it's like, in order to actually make any money, we were down working the jungle every day.
Is there a thing? I heard this thing from people in venues where they ask at the end of Edinburgh, they go, hey, so how much money did you lose this year?
Yeah, it's kind of like that, and I became very skeptical of the whole Edinburgh thing, because you make it as a comedian there if you got the right connections, you're at the Gilded Balloon or wherever, and you've got producers behind you, then yeah, sure, you're going to do great. But to go there and expect to get discovered, sure, the festival is going to find some people and bring them to the front, and that's going to happen. But, there's a lot of good talent that just doesn't get seen, and thousands of pounds get spent on spaces and stuff. And so when we finished our Edinburgh experience, I was like, dude, I don't ever want to do this again. It was like, grueling, and we lost money that we only made money because we were doing the streets, that the legitimate economy of renting a space and paying for advertising, buying your space in the program it was a false economy, I have to lubricate.
Carry on. Enjoy.
I'm so thirsty.
Yes. Enjoy that German beer.
Turnblaser. This show brought to you by Turnblaser.
Other beers are available, I have to say.
So one of the cool things that came out of Edinburgh for me was that I'd gone to a fringe club, and I had managed to meet a guy named Lloyd Warland. I was always kind of on the lookout for organizers and stuff, because naturally you want to pitch your show to a festival, and if you can get wind of somebody and buy them a drink or hand them a postcard, figure out how to not be in their face and make them remember you without being invasive. I managed to sit down beside this guy named Lloyd Warland, who I discovered was the new director of the Melbourne Comedy Festival, the International Comedy Festival. And he had just been given the job And I told him what I did with the Toronto Circle Ball Fair and the Gold Coast, and that I'd been an artistic director, and that I was looking for, a posting as a festival organizer. And he goes, okay, well, show me some stuff. So we made a meeting before I left Edinburgh. I had to fly back to Toronto. He was going through Toronto to talk to the people in Montreal and at the Toronto Comedy Festival. So we had two more meetings, one in Montreal and one in Toronto, flying, back and doing last minute shows before going to Australia again for the season. And we met at these two places. And by the time we'd met in Toronto, he was like, okay, you're on. And we signed a contract where I would be the coordinator of the outdoor theater component of the Melbourne International Comedy Festival for 3 weeks. And he gave me like a budget of like $500,000. And I was just like, this is going to be huge. I was going to get Mr. Bean to come, and do a outdoor show and stuff. And so I was being put in touch with producers and, I was making contacts. So I got back to Australia and I went back to the Gold Coast, and then from the Gold Coast, I had to start in Melbourne. So I went to Melbourne and I started doing my work. I was in the office for about 2.5, 3 months, I guess. About 3 months. I built a model of the Swanston Street area with buildings and stuff. I was going to put stuff on awnings to generate advertising. I was going to hang 5-story screens in Little Flinders and Little Burke Street, and I was going to have one on each side and these big massive industrial projectors to put comedy films in the street that would be interspersed with sponsors' messages. And the idea would be that they would have to produce a commercial that was funny and visual because we wouldn't be able to hear it above the street noise. So it had to be visual comedy that pushed their products. And my producer Lloyd loved this idea.
Setting at the same time, I assume. This is the desire of this.
Yeah. The idea was that we were going to take over Little Flinders, Little Burke Street, Swanston Street, and the Burke Street Mall. So we had a massive precinct. It was all the way up to Flinders Street Station. And this budget that I had was, going to be about 125,000 a week for talent and the rest for infrastructure. So back then I was required to drop about 10 to 15% on infrastructure costs, which was okay. I mean, yeah, you got to have.
But when you say you were required to drop that, so who pays for the 85%? Is that the local council? But you put
no. Everything comes from. Well, this became the thing is that the festival up until this point had never had an outdoor component, and they were trying. Lloyd had decided that he wanted to do it like Montreal, to try and get that vibe from Edinburgh. That's why he was going to these places, because they all had vibrant outdoor scenes. And because of that, the indoor tickets were selling massively because of the outdoor scenes. There were ticket booths.
You're drawing people into the street, and then you get to fly them and drive them into the
but also they can have ticket booths there, and they can sell instead of going through a ticket service. The ticket service is right there on the street next to the shows. So my job was to do as much as I could to produce funds through commercial sponsorship, but he was also empowered with that. So when I gave him these design ideas, like I'm going to put shows on the awnings, up on the first floor of some of these buildings and light the front of the buildings and create, a real festive environment like they do in Montreal, that, we would have for the first time in Melbourne. And I'd never really been to Melbourne before. Like I went there for this, I was like, I've got a posting, and so I went there and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do shows, that I was going to be organizer guy. And then
is that the time, or because it's just taking up too much time to organize? Because it seems like quite a lot.
No. It was going to be like, a full-time job. I would have been working until midnight. And I was in the festival office. I had my own office. I had to watch, literally hundreds of videotapes of outdoor artists who were submitting to me so that I could make a selection, and in that first 3 months I only had 6 months. The festival was in April and I started in September, and I was supposed to have the whole thing programmed no less than 8 weeks before the thing opened up so that the programs could be printed.
4 months sounds like a long time, but it's really, I assume it isn't.
It's not at all. A proper festival like that needs a year. And the thing is that we had a massive staff, and then the whole thing blew up because the the festival was produced by a conglomerate of comedy clubs. So there was like the Last Laugh and the Comedy Club and the Athenaeum Theater and there are a bunch of theaters that every year put on their comedy programs. They built a program that advertised these shows, and then a lot of the smaller places, people could rent their own rooms and put on their own shows. So it was very much a venue based festival, and there was no outdoor festival.
And so they all chipped in together and worked through your guy to make this kind of.
Well, they hired this guy to reinvigorate the festival and try and give it more of an Edinburgh flavor, or Montreal Just for Laughs flavor. And then they got cold feet because the producers were like, well, if you're going to centralize all of the activity into a street festival, then some of these theaters, which are located over in Collingwood, and you've got to drive to them, like they're not in the festival precinct. It worked in Montreal because all the theaters are on Rue Saint Denis, and Rue Lac Saint Jean, or whatever the name of the main streets are there. All the theaters are right adjacent. You walk from a street show, you walk in, give your tickets, and you're at a black tie event.
And even in Edinburgh, if you've got a venue that's out of the sticks in Leith, you've pulled the short straw.
Yeah. And so these guys, they started looking at what I was doing. And at one point, things went quiet, and we were all asked to leave the office for a week. And I was like, I can't leave for a week. I'm working 70, 80-hour weeks here. I'm like, I don't have a life. This is all I'm doing. And I was receiving a full professional corporate salary for this. So I was getting paid well, and I had a good contract, and it was only a 6-month contract, but it was going to set me up for a while. And, because it was a stressful job, man.
Oh, 100%. Stressful. And how far into the contract are you again? You might have mentioned this, maybe I haven't picked up, but you 2, 3, 4, 5 months in, how far in are you now?
I'm about 2.5 months in to organizing things, and like I say, I'm watching videos. I've built a model of the city. I've put up in the first 2 to 3 weeks, I had to have sponsorship ideas, and that's where I came up with the big sales. And so you come up with an idea. I'm going to hang some movie screens that are like 4 stories high. I've got to contact logistical personnel. How am I going to suspend those things? How are we going to make them safe? Where am I going to get the industrial projectors? How much are those going to cost? And so that's my job, is to logistically organize it all, price it all up, find the suppliers, and then hand certain lists to other support staff who can take over for other things.
And I assume the advertising is the attempt to balance the budget on this. So this is going to cost a lot, but how can I offset this cost by having some revenue?
Yeah, and there was some city being kicked in by the money because of tourism. So this is money by the city. Sorry, there was some city by the money. I will promise to get all my words in the correct order from now on. There was money coming from the city and the state, because of tourism. There was sponsorship that the festival had already in play. There were media sponsors, and we had to really up the game substantially in order to have this scale of an event. $500,000 is
a lot of cash,
a lot of money to play.
They tell you to go away for a week.
Tell us to go away for a week, and then we come back into the office, and we've been invited to a big dinner. So the entire comedy festival staff has been invited to a restaurant on a Monday night, and we're all invited in, and we're all sitting at this table, and there's an envelope, and we've all got name tags, and it's like there's a name where you're supposed to sit, and it's like there's an envelope in front of you, and it's all been beautifully set, and there's all kinds of stuff on it, and we all sitting there and talking to each other and everything. And then at one point, one of the members of the board of the festival, who is not Lloyd Warland, and we're wondering where Lloyd Warland is, one of these guys stands up and goes, "Can I have your attention, please? Ladies and gentlemen, Lloyd Warland has been released from his contract, and we are releasing all of you from your contracts. The festival that we wanted to put on, we will not be putting on." And we're all just like, oh. And they go, "The envelope that's sitting in front of you is the full payout of your contract. So we're going to pay you anyway, and let you know that it's nothing that you did. It's just," and they went to the trouble of explaining. They said, "We just don't know what the effect is going to have on the producers over here, the producers over there, and the producers over there. And these are some of the biggest venues of the festival, and they are not in the festival precinct. So putting on a centralized festival has met with a lot of opposition by producers who think that they're going to start losing tickets sales for their venues, and these people are part of the board of governors of this event, so they don't want it.
That they're the people paying. They've got a lot of money up for this. So if they pull their money, it's no longer tenable.
That's right. And so I was like, okay, so I took this check and I had my payout, I was like, okay, I'm back on the streets. So I went straight back to the Gold Coast, where I haven't been having a ball. And I was on the Gold Coast I guess I was there for about 3 weeks, and then my phone rang, because I did have a mobile phone at that point in time.
Bring.
Brand new idea, these the handheld, the smaller ones, Nokia 2110 or something like that. I had it wasn't too big a phone. Anyway, my phone rings, and there's this guy. His name's Ken Trotter, and he's on the other end of the line. He goes, hello, is this David Cassel? And I'm like, yes, it is. And he goes, listen, I'm working for the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and I'll run an organization called FEEP, which is Free Entertainment in Public Places. And we're looking for an organizer for the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. We understand that you've got experience as an organizer. And I'm like, yes. And I don't say anything, right? Like, I've just been working at the comedy festival in the office. This guy is now calling me.
Hey, man, I've just been released from a failed project.
I've been paid in full. What do you want, man? It's like, I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear what was going on. And he goes, oh yeah, well, we've got a bit of a budget to put on a 4-day event. And I'm wondering if you'd like to come down to Melbourne and work it out. So I was like, sure. So I hopped right on another plane. I went back to Melbourne. I walked into his office, and I was given a budget of something like, I don't know, $10,000 to put on a 4-day event in front of the town hall. So I went from this like massive international scale thing to a very small kind of, they wanted to have some sort of street presence, and the people who were putting on the festival didn't want to give up on the idea. Nobody had told Ken to call me. Ken had just done his research, and because I'd won that award and I'd been, doing some stuff up there, he'd heard through circuits that I did this kind of work. And when I got there, I said, I met with him. I said, you do know that I was the man organizing the theater component. He goes, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, okay, now I understand what's going on in terms of the communication of everything here. The Comedy Festival office has been completely restructured. It's got all new people in it. Nobody's communicated anything about what's gone on before, because they want to just go back to what they used to do and add this little satellite festival. So I did that. I got in touch with a lot of local artists. I offered retainers for hats in front of the town hall, and had to deal with the same stuff that I was dealing with on the Gold Coast. It was like, you again, it's like, yeah, it's me. Hi, and it's, I want more money. And I'm like, I can't give you any more. I got $100 per show per person. It's 3 days. You get one show a day. I got to try to spread it out as much as I can, and it began a process for me that over the next 10 years, I was being called by city councils and, being brought in by places like South Bank, which was kind of our Covent Garden, on the Yarra River, where they opened up a big shopping mall. And do you want me to tell that story too?
You can do, yeah, by all means.
Okay, so you Rex,
are you doing shows during this time? You did Street for 3 weeks, and I do want to at some point touch on a Superman show, just because as I was learning as a kid, people told me about that show, and it's got quite an importance to me, because for years my goal was to try and make a show without tricks. I'm not even there yet. Now that quarantine's hit, all the tricks have come back into the show. Sure. So at some point I want to hit on that, but I have no idea where that is in the story. So,
well, it's like, I think, as I explained in the last interview, I expanded my skill set and learned about diversification of my interests at an early age. So I never stopped performing. There was always an appearance on a stand-up stage or a street show, or trying to get a part in a TV commercial or on a series. I mean, I was always, I wanted to be an actor and a performer, and I wanted to be in front of an audience, because I think we touched a little bit on my tragic childhood and the fact that I grew up with foster family. So I was really I was just dying for attention. Okay, like
Need
a lot
love.
of I needed love. I just wanted to be loved by the public. So yeah, so um, the Rex and I had been doing this double act, and so I was working on these things, and Rex and I were still doing our act. You know, we went to Coffs Harbor and did it there, and we went to
And
Edinburgh.
where just can we place in time where we are? Because
We're between 92 and 90, 92, 93 is about the time we're sitting now. We're all leading up to the Adelaide Festival, the Adelaide
so in
Fringe.
'93 you've done the attempt to do the Melbourne. It was the Melbourne Festival. You've got the payout. You got the big payout from the project. I'm 3/4 bottle of wine in here, so you're going to have to help me and lead me through.
I'll be honest with you, Matt. When it comes to the dates of 92, 93, 94,
we don't need dates, just the chronology of it. So when you get your big payout from getting dropped from organising, and you then go back, and now you've got an offer to go and do the Melbourne kind of comedy adjunct little festival for 3 days.
That's like 92. I think it was 92.
Yeah, and so when you're working with Boyd and you're doing the double act, and we're evolving into the Superman show, that's after this?
Well, it kind of runs the Space Commander show. Hodges 3D TV is what the show was called, and it became the Space Commander show in 1995 after something happened.
Is that when the routine that I call it Superman? It's not the Superman team, but that's what I was told when I was a young man.
Yeah,
the Superman team, it comes then at 95.
Well, Space Commander was the name of the show was changed to Space Commander because I was awarded. I was awarded European Outdoor Performer of the Year in 1995, and it launched me into a European career. That's why I live in Europe today. You know.
Okay.
What happened?
So let's deal with Australia first, then.
Sure.
Let's deal with the stuff leading up to that.
A lot going on. It was a bit of globe trotting going from 91 until 93. I was going back and forth between Canada and Australia, and Rex and I had played a summer together doing some festivals, and it was actually Glenn Singer. Have you ever heard of Glenn Singer? Yeah,
I have, yes.
He's a legend. You know, he does a horse act, and very supportive. Again, another real supportive performer. One of those performers that's always brimming with ideas and always wanting to help performers go someplace. And I was doing this act, you know, this very unique act, but I was ending it by standing on a guy and juggling torches because I just couldn't figure what to do. And he comes up to me, you know, and I was like being a superhero. I was being a superhero, but I wasn't. Everything about my act was superhero, the star on my chest, the cape, everything, but something was missing. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Dave, you need to fly." And I went, "Fly?" He goes, "Yeah, your finale needs to be that you fly." And I went, "Okay." He goes, "Figure it out." I was like, okay. So that's when I came up with the idea shortly after that I was going to get 2 guys out of the audience. I was going to stand on their shoulders. I'd get another 8 people out of the audience, and I would jump from these 2 guys and land in their arms. And this became like my signature. It was like, you know, the people that were rushing to the front of my show to take a picture of me in the air before I landed, you know, and the whole back end of my show became around 20, 25 minutes long as I selected my volunteers. I did pre-flight exercises, you know, gave people their instructions and their costumes, and you know, and it became, this is where I really came to understand the incremental building of comedy, that for this 23 minutes, I would do some jokes, I would plant some seeds, and I would try and get the laughter to be rolling laughter, so that by the time we got to the ending, the audience was largely just in continuous laughter for about 10 to 12 minutes, you know? So it was like, you know, these stops and starts, and then we get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they just, and that was kind of what the show became in the end.
And so you were making the laugh points closer and closer together,
and figuring out,
mark, you know, and then you're kind of like a machine gun.
Yeah, you know, and it's like everything that's happening now is going to make you laugh. Everything, you know, and
how do you make? I mean, I understand how I make things funny in my show, but how did you make things funny in your show? How did you make that thing function in that way? I mean, I know it's a really difficult, mean question to ask, but if you can,
I think it's like for every performer, it's trial and error. that, when you're on the streets and you decide to be out there every day. And when I was living in Australia and I wasn't working, on a gig or going, because I started getting campus shows too there, and I was doing some comedy clubs. And I was doing what I always do, going hustling for gigs. That's what we do, You hustle for the gigs and you try and find out places to play and what festivals are on, and who's hiring for that party, and stuff like that. And so the more you're on stage, the more you have a chance to insert bits between two bits are going to work. I'm going to stick in a 10-second bit here, and if it doesn't get a reaction, I go to the thing I know that's going to get the laugh and save the moment. If it does get a laugh, I'm going to push it again to that other thing I think might be able to go in after that. And I'll keep doing that until I have a lull or a failure moment, and then I'll just cut to what works, and they won't even notice if I don't draw attention to that fact, because
it's like an experimental sandwich.
Yeah,
strong bit. Oh, let's frame myself right. Strong bit, experiment, and then strong bit.
Yeah. And I think every performer goes through that they head to the streets, and, a lot of people go out with a bunch of stock material, and they can see that it works, and they start feeling really great about themselves. And, the braver ones start writing their own stuff and going, I got to start replacing that stuff that I know works. Now, if I can just analyze why it works, it's the container of the joke it has a structure. If I replace
what's the mechanics of it, right?
What's that?
Is it mechanics? You look at the mechanics of
Yeah,
it.
it's the mechanics of joke writing. It's the mechanics of delivery, that if I change this element or change these words with this, there's this premise, and then I'm going to put this premise on top of it, but use the same timing, that you will get the same reaction, that a lot of people will laugh at something, even if it's not funny, if the timing is right, and that's you start learning these things, and you kind of start going, okay, I'm getting a laugh, but it's not because the joke's funny. It's because of how I've delivered it. Oh, that's okay. I would do this
magic comedy.
Yeah, I do this magic trick. It was like the oldest magic trick in the world, called Professor's Nightmare. It's like small rope, medium rope, long rope. Every magician who's like, every 8-year-old who learns magic tricks does this trick. But, I decided I'd hold up the rope and I'd go small rope, and then I go medium rope, and then I'd go, and then I go to the audience, and then they'd say long rope, and I go small, medium, long, and they'd be like, no, large rope, and they would get laughs from just trying to get them to say the words with me.
But that's also something else that's interesting. It's something I like playing with a lot is, what you're doing there is you're manipulating your audience. You're giving a false idea of what's about to happen. You lead them into it. It's that classic thing when people step, they clap when they step, and then they lift their foot up and go, I got you.
Yeah.
But just to a different level,
It's very true. That the basic premise of everything, I think, comes down to like holding up a towel. This is one of the things I used to do in my show a lot. Like I had gone through a series of jokes, the audience, and I needed a break. So, you'd sit there and you go, and you'd show them both sides of the towel, you show them
expectation.
Yeah. And you create anticipation, and you just keep building and building. And it's like, they go, what's he going to do? He's going to produce something. And all you do is you go, and you wipe your face, and they're like, but that becomes the whole premise of everything, is build and build and build. And it's about, you have to deliver a payoff. And it was the only time in my show where the only payoff was me having one over on them, It's the same thing I learned when I was doing an earlier street show. I think I might have talked about this in the last interview, was my finale for my clown show, Hotcha Schmarzinski, the one-man parade, was blowing a trumpet. And I did it all with a French accent, and I'd come out and I'd go, and now, ladies and gentlemen, I was very cultural appropriation. It was like, be so totally not acceptable today, because I was like, I want to be French. I'm going to talk like a French man. Eh? I want to work in Quebec because I have a culture there. So anyway, I'm going to do my finale now. I take this bugle, and I'm going to do my finale. Here we go. And I go, but first, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you, and I'd do something, and I'd say something, and I go, okay, and now the finale of the act, I go, and what you can, if you're paying attention, that the audience is going like that when you do that, and so the audience breathes with you, and so you do it the third time, and I'd go, all right, I'm sorry, here we go, the finale of the show, and I'd go, do you ever feel like you're being manipulated? And then everybody would just laugh, because they were like, And then I would like, you draw attention to the fact that they're all holding their breath, waiting for this thing, and it's like, yeah. So you come to understand
Develop
that,
expectation, deny payoff.
yeah,
Is
you
that the
know,
classic thing where you get sort of, I am going to do this at the end of the show, but
first, yeah, Master Lee's big on that. I'm gonna break these boards, but first, he was the king of that. So, yeah.
And so I feel a bit remiss because we didn't touch on you doing other stuff in Australia, but I feel like we've kind of moved on now. We're at 2 hours, so we probably will power on a little bit. So you're in Europe, and you win the European Street Performer award with the Spaceman Show. And the Spaceman Show, had you been working it for many years at that point? Had you been working it for a month or 6 months? You worked it in.
No. This was, the Space Commander show was the natural evolution of Hotch's 3D TV. So since 1988, when I was working in Harbourfront in Toronto, and I'd created all those little bits, I was, picking and choosing, and I now had enough material that I could do, 3 different openings. I could mix and match. I often found myself falling in to the same most favorite bits because they were the crowd pleasers, but there would be times I was just bored and I'd go, okay, I'm going to go and do this time. But no, I had a kid routine that I really loved doing, but I had to make a choice because my show was turning into an hour-long thing, and pitches had to be 30 minutes. So you'd have to drop the kid routine one time and then put in the magic bit the next time or whatever like this. And eventually it all became kind of around, the flying act.
And how do you get to the point of having faith in your volunteers? Because if you're jumping off 2 people's shoulders into 8 people can comfortably carry you, but you have to trust that they're going to do that. And it's a lot more than hold these ropes. I'm going to stand on this thing. There's a point of, Yeah,
there's a point where the whole show became about building.
You carry on. I can hear you. I've just got to go check something. Please carry on.
The whole show became about building trust with members of the audience. So I think I was using about 14 people in the show. My show was very audience heavy. That pretty much every few minutes I was doing something with somebody in the public. And it's just about trying to be charming and getting people to trust you and running a few tests routines with one person and then 2 people. And when you get 2 guys up and you want to stand on them, you got to win their trust. And I think it's safe to say that members of the general public don't want, they don't want to look bad in public. So if you take a volunteer on stage, you can rest assured, for the most part, depending on your manner, of course, that they're going to do what you ask if you treat them with respect and, and you're kind and never try and humiliate them on stage. And that was one of the things about the mid-90s was, and in the mid 90s was also when I started going to Europe. I went to Europe the first year in 1994 because I'd heard somebody had said to me that I should try and take my act to Europe. And I was like, oh, okay. And the Australians were keen on it. I hadn't been back to Canada since 92. So I'd been living in Australia. I actually had moved all my stuff there. I'd stuck it in a container and I shipped it down there. My whole life went to Australia. And then it was like the summer of 94. I went there with my gear. And there was this renaissance happening, performers all over Europe, traveling around. The city of Heidelberg had a street sign. I guess it had been going on for a while, but because the city of Heidelberg had busker zones where you could play from here from 12:30 until 2:00, and then you had to move down the street for 300 meters, and you could play from there from 2:00 until 4:30. And there was they were proper street signs. It was like, this is a busking zone. And so the Europe, I was like, wow, it's really organized here, and the city councils were already having their, regulations kind of put in place. But I met a lot of street performers that year, a lot of Europeans, Cira Minetti and the,
so I'm sorry, I might have missed this. When you first came into Europe, where did you go to?
It was like 94. I came to Covent Garden first. And
just because I ask everybody who does this, because Covent Garden's a special place in my heart.
Sure.
What was the experience like when you first arrived there? What did you see? The people you met, how were they with you?
My favorite memory, which I write about in my book, is watching on a very busy day at Covent Garden how the draw works. or how the queuing works, that everybody coming and writing their names down, and you ending up with like 30 people on a list, and seeing that it was run like almost like parliamentary procedure, that Patty Bramwell's was the Speaker of the House, and he would climb up on the fence.
So this was a draw in the morning, right? By this point, because we have a draw now, but I know at one point there was a list, and people would go at 12 o'clock at night and sign the name on. And I think this was gone by that point. I think you had a draw, yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys will meet up at like 8:15, something like this in the morning.
And some people would sleep on the pitch, because some people, I know that Windsor had a truck, and he would like sleep in his truck, and you'd be there first up, so he'd get his name on him. And I think you just got to pick your slot, like if you first come first served is what.
Okay, so there wasn't a draw at this point.
No, it was. I think it was first come first served. And
so how did it come to?
I'm having some trouble. I'm having some trouble because I did go to Covent Garden many times over the next, several years, and there was changes to the thing. And when this actually happened, I have to check the book. I have to check. But I landed in England, and I'm trying to remember where I stayed. I can't remember. God, I'm losing my mind.
Do you remember the first show you did in Covent Garden?
Oh yeah, it was disaster.
Explain.
Disaster. Oh, just bad time slot. I think it was some strategic split pitching going on. I was on the side pitch, and there was somebody on the main pitch.
So they're doing two pitches at once.
Well, that was what I was going to tell the story about, was this parliamentary procedure on this particular day where
it was
very busy at Covent Garden. The place was teeming, and already it was morning, and we knew the shows were going to start pretty soon. I think, something like 10 o'clock in the morning or 9:30 even. I mean, there were so many people that was going to start as soon as this meeting had stopped. And there was a lot of performers. And I remember Pepe Mime was there, and Patty stands up, and he calls the house to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we're putting a vote on the floor. All those in favor of single pitching, all those in favor of split pitching, all those in favor of strategic split pitching. These are the options we should be voting for. And I remember watching Pepe politicking at the back. And this struck me as just so odd. There was this new performer there, and he was not too young. It was like, he was an older guy, but he was not like ancient.
Well, you say he's an older guy, like 30s at that point, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. He was like, a new act who was trying to get in there. And I guess he'd done a few shows, but he didn't really know the goings on. But his name was on the list, so he had a vote. And I remember Pepe listening to Pepe going, "Listen, Mike, if you vote for single pitching, and give up your spot, like if this guy was going to vote for single pitching, he wasn't going to get a show, right? Because that was what it was. The list went up, and then whoever was at the bottom obviously had the last show. And so if they did a split pitch, it got cut in the middle, and it went like this. And whoever was in the middle was now going head to head with the person who was first on the list, and if it was strategic split pitching, then it was like back and forth, 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 like this on a stagger. So
it's like 20 minutes, and when someone's halfway through the show and somebody else begins.
That was split pitching, and strategic split pitching was one or the other. Right, something like that. I'm trying to remember.
It's okay, a long time ago. You don't panic.
Dynamics, but there were definitely three things going on, and I was like, oh, what? I think I was number 20 on the list, so I was going to have to get my show at.
And so, how did Pepe's politics play out then?
Oh, well, he essentially convinced this guy to vote for single pitching and vote himself out of a show, and I was just like.
And did anyone else argue? Did anyone else say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" Like he's conning you right now.
No. That was the thing, is that people were like, there was this politicking going. I was like the Houses of Parliament, man. It's like, if you do this for me, I'll buy you some drinks, or I'll take you for lunch, and stuff like this. It was like I went I'm not in street performing to be in this. This is ridiculous. I don't want to have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to put my name on a list. I'm a street performer because I like to sleep, And in Canada, I had that luxury. And in Australia, too, I was able to create that luxury for myself. It was like I would always open new pitches if there was too many people on a pitch. I just like, oh, man, I don't want to sit here with my gear and wait 3.5 hours. I'm out of here, And people are like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm not telling you. And I go open a new pitch on my own, which was the story I was going to tell you about the South Bank we had.
You can do very much. Let's get the Covent Garden stories out of the way because
right. So anyway,
really like the idea of getting this stuff. But yes,
the vote was.
We have another 2 hours to go if you wish to use.
Okay, sure. So I essentially watched Pepe do this, and as it worked out, there were enough level heads that it was complete split pitching. That it was such a busy day. It was such a hot day. There were so many performers that it just made sense that they were going to go for this guy will start. And then 20 minutes later, you'll start. Yeah, but I'm behind that guy. So no, we're going to start over there first. We're going to start in the corner over there first, let you get your crowd. And then the main pitch will start. And then when this is over, that guy will start. So the guy who was in the third position had a really hard, job to get his show going because there was a massive crowd over there and you had to grab people for coming around the corner, what were you going to do? So, and people yelling up at the Punch and Judy, stuff like that.
You have a chance to get the big crowd after that guy finishes. So it kind of,
well, that was, that's what I came to learn that day was that these performers had a real history of knowing how to do this. And I think it was early on in my days there. And I was like, I'm just going to take whatever I get and do what I can, and I was never as big as any of those because I think I probably had 2 good big shows just because I lucked out at getting a good time spot on a day when, I had my name was early in the list, whatever. But, I think I have just a couple of good shows and the rest were all like a shit fight for me, and me learning from the other performers like, all right, yeah, that's what you do. Okay. And
were they nice to you? Was the community kind?
Oh, again, it's when you first arrive in a place, the street performers are always like that. It seems, there's
like what?
There's a camaraderie and people invite you in and they take the piss out of you. And because I'm a Canadian, all the palms were calling me, a colonist and, making fun of me and, and stuff like that because I was polite, polite Canadian, whatever. And, and they're all pretty, they drink and they swear and, they're rough around the edges and smoking. And I didn't do any of that. I was a nice guy.
No idea what you mean.
Yeah. So
what was your first show like then?
My first show where?
In Covent.
Oh, like I said, I think it was probably, it was a middling show, that the sense I got was they are used to something and what I'm doing is perhaps just a little bit too weird and maybe a little bit too nicey nice, that the sensibility of the audience is much more rough around the edges. It's like
you mentioned in Australia it was quite rough. And so did it feel like this was a next step up in terms of being rough and ready and rude and crude?
Yeah, it's not like I wasn't new to this. When I was at Edinburgh and we were doing the shows there, I did go to a place that they called the Bear Pit, which was like this bar where everybody went after shows. And there were shows in the bar and you had approximately 7 to 10 seconds to make it work before the audience started to crucify you, And I remember
in Edinburgh, was that the late night one, the one that had the balcony around and people used to spit on you?
That's right. And I did a show in there, and I remember going in there, and I went to the sound man. I went, can you play this music? And I'm going to start my show. And I got up there and I seriously, I got about 15 seconds into my act. And they were like, get off, you suck, get away. And it was like, I wasn't a stand-up comic. I was a visual comic. And then I figured that the only way that I was going to be able to stay on stage was if I just stopped everything and did something else. And so I got on the microphone. I went, wait. Now, I feel as though the room is really lacking in love. And I just want you to know that if you're feeling unloved and you need some loving, just throw up your hand and go, "Oh, Mr. Man, I need some loving today, and I'll come over there and plunge my hot steaming tongue down your throat. What do you say?" And some guy up at the at the back of the room went, "Oh, me," and so I, and the place was packed. There were tables, benches, and the only way to get to the back was to stand on the tables and walk across the room. So that's what I did. I mounted the tables, I walked over to the guy, I got us positioned, and I gave him just a big wet tonguey, and the crowd just went fucking nuts, and they were clapping and everything, and I'm like, this isn't my act, but I don't care. I'm alive.
What's the thing? They wanted to see Jeopardy. They wanted to see Risk Summit. And if you go out there and you're being pretty and you're doing what you know, they're just like, oh, fuck off. No, I want to see you risk your life.
Yeah, and the thing was that they said that if you could pull off a set in this bear pit, that they would book you in the ballroom next door and you'd get a show. And I was like, I remember that what happened next was I turned around and the crowd was going crazy. I went, "Anyone else?" And this guy up on the balcony went, "Oi, mate." And I was like, "Okay." And I got back up on the tables and people are clapping and cheering, and somebody hands me a beer and I drink it, and I march all the way back. And I get a guy out of the audience because I got to get up, but I can't get up because the table's not high enough. So I get this guy, big guy, and I stand on him. I get him to push me up there, and I get kind of hung over in the corner of the thing. And I get my foot in the thing so I can get up, and I push myself up, and another big tonguey, crowd goes crazy. And then I turn around and I put my hands like I'm in the corner, right? Yeah, the corner's like this, and I'm like here, and my arms are like this, and I've got my hand the wrong way. It's like it's over like this, over the banister, and my guy is down there, and I start lowering myself onto him to put my feet on his shoulders, and he steps away. And I'm standing in the corner, like I'm hanging in the corner from the balcony, like a crucified Christ figure. I'm just like standing there going, "It's good." And he's like, he pulls himself away, and he lets me squirm for a bit. The crowd goes absolutely crazy. He gets underneath me. He saves my ass. He helps me down. The audience claps and cheers, and I'm out of there, man. I take my gear and "Thank you very much. My name is David Cassel. Good night." And I'm finished. I'm not doing anything else, And there's a long lineup of people, and I was happy to survive it. So you come to understand that that's what English comedy audiences want. That's what Australian comedy audiences want. Australian comedy audiences, but Canadian audiences, they're not like that, or they weren't back then. It might have changed, but there was never that kind of like, "Oi, mate, this country's like 2,000 years old. Show us your nuts."
I've been asked, and I will very briefly say, Trevor Rooney has begged me in the comments to tell you that he's watching.
Oh, well, that's great. I appreciate it. Trevor's been doing the Looney Rooney radio show, and he's been playing songs from my album, The Yin and Yang of All Things. Look, shameless plug. Yeah.
Look, you've got it all ready, haven't you? All the plugs.
Dude, my life's a show. What can I tell you? I live in a truck. If I don't make it big before I'm dead, I'll be dead.
Yeah, I get it, mate. I live in a boat. It's the same situation. I'm not going to show you around the boat because you'll be horrified. But nonetheless, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, did you found your feet in Covent in the end? Did you stay there long?
England was, and I forgot that back in 1986 when I went to Italy, I forgot actually that was when I first appeared at Covent Garden with my Hotchkiss Marzinski one-man parade show. That's back when Alternative Arts, I think, was just getting started there. So I was in the Covent Garden there, and I did my little clown show at Covent Garden, and I had a couple of nice little shows, but I was only there for a couple of days while I was waiting to go, the remaining trip to Italy. So, I went there a couple of, I think I always stop at Covent Garden on my way through to Glastonbury, because I was like, with the gang of people. I met Arabella Churchill, because she was always in Australia.
Haggis, who's been watching through a lot of the interview. I don't know if Haggis is still here, but he sent his love at the very beginning of the interview. He said it was great to hear your voice.
It's nice. Yeah. Arabella and Haggis and Jules, Jessica is actually, that's her right there in the crowd. That's Jessica Jules. as a child, not even interested in my show. Well, I've got this massive, massive crowd that I'm surfing, and she's just like, whatever, she's like looking away. And I think it's hilarious that the newspaper caught that photograph and caught a picture of her not even looking at me. It was kind of funny. But yeah, it was interesting because we discovered, Arabella and I discovered that we actually have family history because my name's Cassel, and if you go into the Winston Churchill archives, Winston Churchill was the benefactor of a man back then named Ernest Cassel, who is in some way, shape, or form my extended relative. But that's a story for another time. But when we found this out and that this name appeared and that we kind of looked at each other and went, so our families have met before, and it was just kind of weird. Fun but weird that that serendipity somehow brought us our names back together. So anyway, and we completely she didn't know me, right? We just met on the streets, so that was kind of cool. And then I ended up going back to Glastonbury, and every year I'd show up at Covent Garden.
Yeah, but the first time, and just to keep the chronology for here just a little bit, when you first go to Europe, as we're leading up to 95, I believe.
Yeah.
When you first go there, you go to Covent Garden first. You're in England first.
Yeah.
Then where did you go after England or after Britain?
Then I landed in Amsterdam, and you go to the Lights of Plane and you meet performers and you find out that
the Dutchmen were there.
No, they were pretty big by then actually, and they were traveling around the world doing Daidoge, Shizuoku, winning $25,000 prizes everywhere. They were like at the forefront of all the prize-winning festivals and stuff. So yeah, it was. But there was who was there? The Yost brothers, Paul Van Wees, the Van Wees brothers, Peter Post, Mr. Jones. He wasn't really a street performer. He was more of a festival performer. Cira Minetti was there. She had a double act at the time. There was a lot of acts. Mark Schreier, called him Mookie. He was an American. He lives in Ireland now with his family.
He's lined up. He will be with us at the end of September, I think. Mark Schreier is doing an interview.
Cool. We all converged after meeting in Lights of Plane. Word got out that there was a festival that we should all go to in Ghent, Belgium, called the Hintsfeesten. This hundreds of years old festival that celebrated the hanging of the local officials. So the festival started with a parade of officials with nooses around their necks, and it was
like an inverted Guy Fawkes.
Yeah, it's just like back some time ago, some conqueror came in and hung all the local officials. And so they celebrating their Belgian heritage. This is how they started their festival, by parading all the local officials with nooses around their necks. And this festival was primarily a spectacle festival. So they had a major budget to bring in the big companies and some of the more high powered, smaller acts, but not really. They didn't really, it was all spectacle. Big stuff that would take over City Square for 10,000 people. And we all showed up, and they had this big grandstand that sat like 3,000 people to watch, and they set it up just for the parade. And then some of the shows that happened, like maybe 2 or 3 shows that happened over the course of this 10-day event, but it largely sat empty for the 10 days. So we all showed up, about 25, 30 of us showed up there, and we all got spaces in the local campground. Some of us slept in tents, some of us slept in other people's vehicles. I remember that everybody had a bike, and I didn't have a bike, and Cira Minetti was like, "You don't have a bike." She was like, she was from Rotterdam. And the next morning I had a bike, and no questions were asked. But it was like they were, again, another community of, you don't have a bike, you need a bike, and then I had a bike, and it was like, don't ask questions. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, all right. I got a picture in my book of me on my bike with all my gear. And a European performer needs to be able to move around on a bike because the pitches are everywhere. In a city like Ghent, you could open up pitch anywhere. We had the main pitch, and so there was a queue, and we got our names on lists, and it was all seemed to be quite organized. That it advanced every day. It was kind of a scheduled thing, but how do we get it? I guess it was a draw, and then somehow, some way, that draw was for the week, like for the whole festival, and then we just rotated so that you could, everybody got a chance at 8 o'clock in this massive space. And the whole idea became to try and fill these stands up with 3,000 people, which you could easily do up until about midnight from about 7 p.m. So every show that went in there was killer, and you couldn't actually hat the whole thing. People would come and go, but it was like, unless you had a strategy like getting, like what I did, where you get two people and you put them at the exits and you give them bags and you send somebody up to the back. You had to do all that, which I did. And
volume of people there.
Yeah, and you could easily walk out with quite a lot of money when you think about it. 3,000 people. Not everybody gives you
Trevor's
money.
firing out information here. So Trevor's said 3 Beer Festival, Ghent, Rumpold, the last night's show.
Oh, well. There was a lot of festivals at Ghent, but this particular year, 1994, was the year that the festival changed because of something that had happened. And I told you, I was running around with a Palm organizer writing stories. And every time I was doing shows, all my notes about what worked and what didn't went into this electronic organizer, which I would then take to my laptop and download and then print, so that I had hard copies in case I lost the data. And one of the things that happened at that festival was we all got really drunk one night, and probably not too many days after it started. We were a big raucous crew. We'd finish shows, we'd go to the bar, and we'd just like buy drinks all night, until we'd stay out until 3, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. And on this particular night, we were all like on our bikes, riding back to the campground, and Drew Franklin and Carrie Bagg, who was an Australian performer, a very sort of green performer who was working up a new act. They were racing at the front, and somehow their tires touched. She went flying full speed over the front of her bike and landed not on her hands, but on her face, and slid along the ground. And, it was a real mess. And she wasn't making a lot of money on the streets. She was making enough to get by, but she was now in serious shit. It was like she was messed up. She wasn't going to be working. And I remember we got her back to the campsite and tended to her wounds. And I think it was pretty much the next day that we all decided that we would do a big group show in the big square, and we would give all the money to her. And so we just kept pumping this idea. We had a barbecue, and we just kept pumping the audience, and it was a very long show, and just kept getting money and money and money. And then we handed it all to her because she was panicking. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what to do. So, again, like what happened for you with your recent, adventure and the loss of your things, the performing community really got behind her. And I wrote about this story because the next thing that happened was the local press got wind of it, the Hintenaar, which was the local paper, and they wrote an article that said, to paraphrase, that here is a festival that puts on some of the biggest spectacle in the world. And the performers who have crashed this festival, who came here uninvited, are perhaps for the first time representing what the spirit of festival is. And the fact that they are not officially part of this festival is a bit of a crime, because none of them are getting paid to be here except from the money that the people put in the hat. And the organization has not really made any space for them. They haven't kicked them out, but they are not part of the official program. And so to rectify this, we are going to give the street performers of the Ghent Festival the prize of Ghent, which is 26 cents, the cost of a newspaper. But the prestige of that and what it did for the local community and what it did for busking in Belgium, and, to show this sense of community and what kind of people we were, that, there's this idea that street performers could be, thieves and scum of the earth and run around, stealing stuff, whatever. But, that really what they were people that were full of love and laughter and and support of each other. So I wrote that article. I wrote a story about it. It's called The Prize Again, and it ended up on PNet back in the first one of the first internet websites. Rex wrote some articles. I wrote that article, and a few other articles got posted there. But for me, it was a representation of what our community can be when it wants to be.
Yeah, which is beautiful. And our community has, on many occasions, stepped up to support people who are in trouble. I think that's one of the great tenets of, as far as I can see, the street performance community, is that people will put into their pocket and they will put into they'll take their heart and their effort and their soul to help each other.
Yeah,
We really do hold each other up when we need to.
it's true. It's really true. You know,
Hmm.
I if I may say, I had a situation for myself, you know, about a year ago where we knew we were going to have to be in this bus. And a lot of my old street performing mates came to the party because I said, I got to get a solar cell to make it so that we can survive in this bus. And within 3 days, everybody got behind my crowdfunding plan, you know, to get this thing so that now that we are living rough in a bus, that it's not a difficult thing. So they were there, you know, even for me, you know, at this late stage in my career, they came forward and said, yeah, we're going to help you, you know, and you sit and you go, oh, you know, you just, it makes you feel soft inside. It
Yeah.
does. It really does. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. I mean, there's a lot of darkness in the world, and I think the light of love of your community and the care and the sharing of our community, to know that when things go bad, you're not alone, really pierces through the darkness with a
Yeah.
great big light. So, in terms of your story, what happens next after this then?
Oh, well, I had always, you know, what one of the people told me in Australia, he was a European performer, and he goes, you should bring your act to Europe. And I said, why? And he says, because in Europe, you can get booked at festivals and they pay a fee and you don't have to pass your hat. So, and I said, what kind of fee? And he goes, and he started telling me the kinds of fees. And these were professional appearance fees, like proper fees. You know, you're talking 1,000, 1,500 a day to do 2 or 3 shows, you know, or 2 shows if they're longer shows, or one show if you've got a big reputation. That there was a real industry in Europe that encompassed all of these countries, and that there were conferences where acts would present their latest work and hope to get into a network. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'd seen this poster in a friend's house back in the 80s, and it was a poster for a festival called the Limburg Straattheater Festival, and it was in Maastricht in Holland, and it was, you know, it was a festival very similar to what Steve Scott was doing in Australia around the Gold Coast, but a thousandfold larger. That what this festival had done is it had gone to 150 towns, villages, you know, communities, and gotten them all to buy either a day of shows or a weekend of shows. And so I made it my objective that summer to try and get into that festival, that I wanted to audition for that festival. So I went to Ghent, I played Lights of Plane, I played Heidelberg, I got into Paul, you know, Van Weese's bus, you know, and slept in his bus while we drove around to pitches, and he introduced me around to people. And we ended up in Zurich at this fireworks festival, which was, oh my God, 3 million people descending on this, you know, tiny city of Zurich, which isn't a big city. It's not, you know, it's like 3 million people around this lake watching fireworks, and we're all doing street shows during the day, and then at night the lights go off, and if you just finish your show, the lights go off and there's like no light, and you've got your gear and there's thousands of people, your circle collapses and there's just thousands of people like, ah, get me out of here, you know, and you're trying to get your gear together, and you're going against the crowd as everybody's rushing to the lake to try and get seats, and you can't, you know, it's like, and you're sitting there trying to get out of the crowd for at least a good 35 minutes, and there's fireworks going off behind you. I don't care. I just want to get out of this crush of people. You know, and so I got to do all those events. But what I did is I'd called the Limburg Straattheater Festival. I said, "Hi, my name is David Cassel, and I was hoping that I could come and do an audition at your, you know, for your festival for next year." And they said, you know, we've just had a cancellation. Can you be here next weekend? And I was like, yeah. And they said, okay. Can you be here on Saturday? We have a show at 6 o'clock. There's been an injury and we need an artist. And we don't have anybody in the program that can do it because everybody's scheduled. So if you can come, we're going to give you a hotel room. You can eat with the artists. we'll pay for your train fare, and we'll pay you the standard daily fee for an artist. And I was like, okay, I want to audition. They go, yeah, but any artist who comes here gets paid. And I'm like, wow. Okay. So I waited my week. I got on the train. I went to Limburg. They put me on in a village. I had a really nice crowd. The show went swimmingly well. I'd learned enough Dutch. My naam is David Cassel. Ik heb nodig een kleine vrijwilliger. Ik heb een cadeautje voor jou. So I went through and did what I'd always done, which was translating my show into French, into Flemish, and so yeah. But also, working with local people who speak. My translator wasn't doing it. I could go, ik wil een broodje hebben, alsjeblieft, would get what my portable desk assistant would give me. So, so I got there, did the show went swimmingly well, and I didn't see anybody from the organization. Nobody came up to me. So they put me in a car. They drove me back to the artist village where John Feely and Alex Dandridge were some of the guest performers that year. It was beautiful. They had like silver service, buffet, and they were staying in this country club style residence thing. Everybody had, it was like 5 stars, man. I'm like, oh yeah. This is much better than the dormitories we got at Halifax, or the motor hotel we got in Coffs Harbour. This is like, this is where you want to be. You want to be doing these festivals. And
so there was this idea that in Europe you were treated as a different class of entertainer, even though you were on the street.
Yeah, it was like night and day. It was like in the Anglo-American Empire, street performers or buskers were a class lower than working class, that they were not looked upon as providing a social service. They weren't looked upon grifters and knockabouts and ne'er-do-wells. But in Europe, the tradition was entirely different, and the style and quality of shows. Yes, there was a busking tradition, but a lot of these buskers had theatrical backgrounds or had come up with concepts for the shows because the marketplace demanded it. If you wanted to get into these networks of festivals, which paid money, then you had to have an act that was worthy to get on the list of this is what's new this year kind of thing, And if you wanted to survive, this is what I learned very early on, is that if you came with a winning act, you had about 3 years to make it through all of the festivals that were in the circuit. 16 to 20 weeks a year, 3-4 days a week. Not everybody got booked for that. Some would get like 6 festivals a year or 2 or 10, but there was 20 weeks of work to be had, 16 to 20 weeks of work. And it all paid a sort of a standard wage because there were these conferences where the producers would come and say, this is what we pay the artists. And in France, it was all largely based on the French because they had the chômage and they had if an artist in France was booked for 50 shows a year or 52 shows a year, they got unemployment insurance to make up a wage that put them into a respectable class of person. Artists were taken care of, and it was we were going through a change. There was the neoliberalism of the 80s that had taken over in North America and in the Anglo-American Empire was creeping into Europe around this time, and it took about the next 10 years for it to finally, and the charge was largely led by the Dutch or the countries that were in the definition of the new Europe. When George Bush was talking about New Europe and Old Europe, what he was really talking about was Old Europe being the socialist nations that took care of people, and the new European nations which were embracing neoliberalism. And to embrace neoliberalism, you had to do away with cultural funding and anything to do with social programming. And, the Dutch, what they did is, earlier on when I first got there, there was I was told the statistic was something like 6,000 to 7,000 artists in the network who had received degrees in art schools. And because they had these degrees, they would get the jobs at the festivals. Then those festivals were often funded by the state because the art being presented was to be presented uncensored, and then
there was a lofty ideal carrying through the facilitation of the work.
Yeah, the shows being presented, much, following on from my tradition in the first interview about what I was doing in Canada by presenting shows that had socially relevant content. So the street performing, the outdoor theater was there to stimulate the communities, to bring them together in a sense of celebration, perhaps to discuss issues. There was a company called Caraboche when France changed its funding structures. There was an election held, and some new guy got in. What but what they did is they got their funding, major funding, for the last time from the government, because the government decided it wasn't going to fund that size work anymore. And what they did is they set a park on fire, and there was all of these installations talking about the death of socialism, and it was a very political show that was presented in a very large park that attracted thousands and thousands of people, and you could feel the heat from the fires that they put in cages, and the workers, that they were presenting as part of this show, who were operating the fire machinery and looking like laborers in mines, or and that was what the show was about, was that these festivals were there to stimulate the lives of these working people, the general people of the public. That's why, and people loved it, and they didn't mind that their tax money was being spent on this, because they looked forward to these things every year. But the new economic rationalism that was creeping in with neoliberalism was starting to take that away, because you can't have a good capitalist system without isolating people and removing their social possibilities. So anyway, I don't know if we're supposed to talk about that kind of stuff.
You can, if you like, by all means.
I don't want to bore people either with it. There was a big change that happened in the mid to late 90s as we got to 2001, where we all know what happened there. But up until that time, there was a transition. So the story about Limburg was that none of the organizers came to the event, and I was sitting there with John Feely and Alex Dallinger, and I was like, nobody came, man. Nobody came to see my show. And then this girl comes from the office, and she goes, David Cassel. I went, yeah. She goes, the director of the festival would like to speak with you. And I was like, oh, okay. And I go in, and he's like really apologetic. He goes, listen, we're really sorry, but there was another injury today, and every one of the board members was off dealing with the emergency of trying to reschedule this thing. We were having to move people around. We're really sorry. Can you come back next weekend? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, we'll pay you again. We'll from wherever you are, we'll give you a train fare. You'll get the whole, where you're staying now. I'm like, okay. So I go on my way for a week. It's close. I think I went to Maastricht and a couple other little cities where I could busk just on the streets. And I remember Alex and John making fun of me, going, oh, so you're going to go and be Billy the Busker. Oh, Alex, David's going to go and be Billy the Busker. They were like really kind of like, ooh, you guys are the royalty now of street performers. You're not street performers anymore. You're doing street shows at festivals and getting paid huge money. And I still have to go out and make shekels on the street corner. Fine. But I was one of very few people who was trying to get into that as a street performer. And, so anyway, I did they scheduled me. I went back, I did the show, and they came back to me. I was sitting in the bar that night. It was like the last night of the festival, and the girl comes out and she goes, David, the director would like to see you again. And I went, okay, cool. So I went to the office. It's like midnight, and everybody's in the bar drinking, and there's dancing, and it's like everybody's getting ready to leave the festival, and I'm like, okay, how's my festival going to end? My event here. I feel like I've been kind of part of this. And I go in, and the director sits me down. He goes, listen, we really like your act. We'd love to have you next year. And we've prepared a contract. And if you'd like to sign it before you leave tonight, that would be cool. And I didn't really care what money they were offering me, But when I looked at it, it was way more than I'd ever gotten at a festival before to be there for 10 days. And I didn't have to pass the hat, and it was going to be way better than me passing my hat. So I signed that night, and I walked back to the festival, and I partied with everybody. And on the strength of that one contract, I called 10 other festivals in that network and said, I'm playing at Limburg Festival next year. And, oh, well, then you must come and play in Poland. You come to the Katowice Festival. It's like I got booked by Hergé Zahn in Helenia Góra Festival and Lee Hayes. I don't know if you've spoken with Lee Hayes, but he ran the Rotterdam Straattheater Festival.
Oh, yes. We are very soon.
Yeah, you definitely got to talk to Lee Hayes.
Sorry about all reaction here. I've just discovered that my phone, which is running our internet signal, is on 3%. And so I'm desperately trying to get it charged.
All right.
Going. Yeah.
Okay. Are we going to run out of power?
Please carry on, buddy. I just wanted to explain the manicness that was happening here.
Yeah, I saw you.
Please carry on. So Lee Hayes.
Yeah, so he was running the Rotterdam Festival. I landed an agent at the Limburg Festival that I got great 5-star reviews the year that I went back. And an agent from Hamburg saw my show and she goes, "I would like to represent you." And I was like, great. So, I signed with her, and the next year, 1995, she got me a fully booked 16-week tour. I was playing all over Germany. She was working Germany, and then I landed a couple agents, one in Holland and one in Belgium. So I got more gigs, and I was working all the time. 1995 was kind of like my banner year. I was 34 years old. I was living in Australia half the year by this point, and the
I take it the winter. So the European winters, you're in Australia, and the summertime, you're in Europe.
yeah,
European summertime. You're
yeah.
here.
And before I'd gotten to Europe that summer, I'd spent the winter in Australia, their summer, and we went to the Adelaide Fringe Festival in 1994 with the Three Canadians, and me and Rex did our shows there as soloists, and we also did Fritz and Otto there. And fringe festivals are these places where certain acts rise to the top of the thing, and there's a fringe garden where some of the acts become popular artists, and everybody wants to come and see them. And I happened to be very lucky that I was inside of a group of shows and performers that had that sort of prestige for that festival, and I was doing really well in my busking shows. I had some scheduled shows in the garden, but I wasn't in a scheduled venue, and yet I got reviews that set me up. I got really great reviews. I also played at the Melbourne Comedy Festival that year, and I also got 5-star reviews for my indoor version of my show. And then I landed a television commercial, a really good one that paid me like a lot of money, and then I went to Europe, and I was doing the Rotterdam Festival, and then I won European Outdoor Performer of the Year. So that was kind of like my whole year. I was just like, okay, it doesn't really get much.
European Performer of the Year. Like, is it one festival? Is it a particular festival, or is it a body of organizers?
That's what somebody told me the award was. I mean, Jean-Michel, the Flying Dutchman, had won there, and there had in previous years, the artist who had won the Rotterdam Festival went on to be presented throughout Holland, as kind of like the winner, and that was part of the joy. Is that when Lee was running it, there was really good, well-prepared food for the artists. We were put up in a really nice hotel. There was a swimming pool, there was beer, and there was 25, 30 artists all vying for these prizes of winner, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, he even paid a fee for you to be there. So you got your fee, you got your hat money, and then you had a chance to win these prizes. And that was the year that I picked up that award. And based on that and the strength of having an agent and having played all these festivals, I started coming back to Europe every year about April and staying until September, October. And then I go back to Australia, and I was running a studio by then, and I'd set up a multimedia company called Sticky Planet Multimedia. And I got into the whole sort of birth of the internet, and I bought a big $35,000 computer, and I was learning programming, and anyway, getting clients for commercial clients, and I was using that to finance shows in Australia that were outdoor in nature. And I was organizing events for small city councils and different city councils around the city of Melbourne. I was part of the merging of the councils. There used to be 16 different city councils in the city of Melbourne, and I was crashing they would all have these festivals that they would put on, that were 1 day or 2 days, like the Chapel Street Festival, which ran a weekend. It was 2 days. They closed the street on Friday, and then it would open again on Sunday. But it was 20 blocks long, and it was just packed with people. And there were no real scheduled street performers there. So I remember when I first moved to Melbourne, 93, 94, I played down there. I'd find a pitch and I'd block up an intersection. And at one point, the organizers came to me and they're like, "You can't do this. People can't move. And I was like, can I go over there? So I went to the edge of the festival and I still blocked it up. And at one point, the main organizer came up to me and she goes, I really like what you're doing, but it's really a safety hazard. Can you come and meet me on Monday? Because we do this every 6 months, and I would like to try and figure out how to do this so it's not so dangerous. So I went to her office. I ended up organizing the street performers for the next 6 events that they did. So 2 events a year, and they became part of my client list. I did
3 years there.
Yeah, it was good, and I would organize a thing and have it sort of all done so that I could go out and do shows too, because I wanted to be a part of it. And what I did, and when I started doing this, it's when I started coming up with a kind of a scale, because there's a lot of performers, hey Dave, can you give me a gig? And I'd be like, okay, well, I got to figure out. I have like 5 or 6 events in a year. And I tried to spread it out, but also I would give the clients, a list of performers and say, please pick who you think you'd like to have at your event, who you think would appeal. And some festivals would pick the rougher acts, and some would pick the real family friendly stuff. And no matter what I did, somebody was always put out a joint. Why didn't you hire me? And I was like, I leave it up to them. And then what I did is I came up with a system that kind of got picked up by Chapel Street, and then I started using it with all the events I was organizing, that I wanted the festivals to pay like they did in Europe to senior artists who had been in the business a while, had a real top act like Justin Case, who did a bicycle act, a falling apart bicycle. It took him years to put it together. Christoph, who was, one of Australia's most loved clowns. There were people at the top of the game who were always getting the gigs, and when I was organizing stuff, people would often ask if they could have that artist, if I would line that person up. I'd be like, yeah, sure. I mean, he's part of your culture. Why not? It's what you want. So what I did is I was able to up the rates. There were shows scheduled for artists who would come and play for like several thousand people, receive a full-scale wage and not pass their hat. Even though they were a street act, they weren't going to be passing the hat. Then there'd be the street level artists who would get a gage of like $100 per show for 2 or 3 shows a day plus their hat. And then I would make room at $50 a show for juvenile acts, new people who wanted to come and try it out. And then I'd make the streets open for anybody else. I'd have fly pitches, And so there was always an accommodation for everybody, because people always crashed festivals. There was nothing you could do about it. It's like, I'm playing your festival anyway, David. What?
Let's say this. I'm in a place with very bad internet signal, and so when my phone, which I can't plug in, was sat on top of this lovely collection of bottles, which is a bottle per interview. Yeah. When I put the phone up here, we had good signal, and I could hear you very well. Now I've had to plug it in. I'm losing signal. It's becoming difficult to carry on.
All right.
So can we do this? Can I get you back for a 3rd time to finish your story? And can we do the last 14 minutes now to take it to 3 hours? And we'll come back and we'll see you again in the future on Whining On.
That would be
Is
great.
That okay with you?
That's fine by me, man. I'm so wrapped that you've actually taken the time to have me on and let me tell these stories. I really respect what you're doing. The idea that you're creating this archive of all of this incredible talent that's out there. I'm just so blessed and honored that you decided to include me. I'm very grateful, and I thank you for that. And I congratulate you.
I'm blessed and honored to have you here. It's been captivating both times I had you on to listen to you, and we do have 14 minutes left if we do this now. And so if you'd like to finish up with the bits you're on now, and then we can pick up again when we do our next interview, which will probably be, I think, looking at now will probably be November time.
Yeah. All right. Well, I opened up a studio in Melbourne, and it became a bit of an institution. So what I did is I was experiencing a lot of success in my career, and I would come back from Europe, and I had an agent who would get me television work, and it was never what I wanted. It was always commercial work, but they liked me, and they always went out of their way to cast me in things that were going to pay me a reasonable sum of money so that I could keep my business open, because I was doing all of this stuff for outdoor theater and street performance but I was also running a multimedia company and doing a lot of programming and taking digital clients and then shoveling the money that I'd make from them into my ensemble works. And I was doing shows like on Phillip Island where they commissioned me to do a couple of interactive outdoor shows where the public would come down to the island, and I'd have
Is
a
Phillip
show
Island
happen.
a particularly nominal space? You mentioned it as if it's something that people should be aware of. I'm not, so please.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a small island called Phillip Island, and it had a budget because they had a tourist center on the island. People would come and visit this island and walk around, and there would be stories about George Bass, the guy who discovered the Bass Strait. It was very kind of a dry place. It was like all 19th century, 18th century architecture and stories of ye olden days. And they commissioned me. The first thing they commissioned me to do was to create the George Bass story. So we did it. We created an outdoor show with a rowboat with Matthew Flinders and George Bass, and my wife at the time, Abby Collins, was the cabin boy. And so we did this show in the park. People would come down, and we got audience volunteers out. We had, we'd bring people out to be the oarsmen on our boat. We'd get like 12 people up and all get them to go, oh, oh, and we whipped them and stuff like this. And we do. And so we took all the street performing tricks of the trade, all the volunteer stuff, and incorporated into these historic outdoor theater shows. And then it was pretty successful. So they had me do another one. It was Alice in Wonderland. So we got a cast of like 60 casting crew of 16 people together, and we created scenes all around the park. So the audience would come with picnics, and they would come and see a scene, and then the characters would move to another location. And, it was very much theater of chase, which I'd been seeing a lot of in Europe and had been very inspired by in Europe. So a lot of my ideas for shows that were happening in Australia were kind of coming from my exposure to the European scene that I was getting every year. And some of the stuff you saw in Europe was just insane. Like the French, in the city of Chalon, they customize cars to look like souped up police cars, and they dress like police officers, and they go and they park in intersections, and they set off smoke bombs and create chaos so that as drivers are coming to the intersection, they have to navigate around all of these performers in the streets making anarchy and chaos. And you just sit there and you go, this would never happen in the Anglo-American Empire, like never. So anyway, I had an opportunity to create some shows. Chapel Street booked me for their 6th event, which was the first time they kind of said, we want to have a spectacle style event as well as the buskers for the Grand Prix. And so I engaged, 30 performers, and we created a whole bunch of new numbers and abseiled from buildings, so there were street performers who were supposed to busk, but then there was a major problem that the city revoked their permit for the first time in history because the Grand Prix, the Formula One Grand Prix was coming, and they wanted to do their street festival, but because the place was going to be closed down for the Grand Prix, they didn't get their street closure. So even though they spent money on us, we weren't performing at a street closure. We were performing on sidewalks while the roads were still open. It was a headache. We got video of it, and if you ever go to my website, you can see the documentation of what we ended up doing, but there were no crowds,
Will be in the description of the show, everybody.
Yeah. So anyway, the studio that I ran was called the Multi-Purpose Room. There was a juggling club in there every Wednesday night. A lot of performers would show up there, street performers, a lot of young people. When I opened the place, Juggle Art, being run by a guy named Gordon Wilson, took up residence behind me. So we had this big studio, which was mine, and his juggling warehouse, which was behind my place, just across the hall. And for many years, we were an institution in the city of Melbourne. People came there on Wednesday nights to juggle. They go to his shop to buy equipment. I had 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds in there, 30 or 40 people every Wednesday. And some of those people grew up and went on to work with me in some of my ensemble projects. It was the coolest thing. It was like everything I wanted in my life. I wanted to be a part of community. As I told you in my first interview with you, that I believed that by being a part of a creative community, I would find the love and acceptance that I was looking for. And in Australia, I really did find that that the circus community really embraced me. The street performer community largely embraced me. You know, there's always going to be friction with street performers, particularly when there's one
Very
who's
contemptuous lot.
well, you know, some performers, I won't name names, but some performers would say, "You're organizing things is not, it goes against what street performing is." And I'd be like, yeah, but if we don't organize ourselves, the city's going to organize against us. And it's better if we are the authority and we set up an infrastructure that we become the authority, a peer-run authority that issues its own cards and shows the city that we're capable of that instead of handing over power to them. And there, we had a street performers association called SPAM, the Street Performers Association of Melbourne, and you know we had
it's a good acronym. It's a good acronym.
Yeah, we were trying to go nationwide. I don't know if Dom ever.
Let's take this because I think we're reaching the last 10 minutes now. So let's talk a little bit on this in the last 10 minutes.
Sure.
Very interesting, this idea, and I understand what people are saying with the idea, the problematic nature of organization, and it's something that's very contemporary now, very much in London, because in London we're about to probably have Westminster licensing everything in the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of the performers organizing things. I think it's great because performers will understand how to organize things. But a problem I'll pose to you, which is the last problem we'll deal with in this interview, is that there's a guy in central London who plays a traffic cone. And when I say plays, he sits there and he gets in his mouth and goes, bah, 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 bah. It's, to look at it initially, it's the most decrepit kind of low budget thing you'd ever see. But I've watched the guy over 7 years develop that craft. To the point where now I stop on the street and hear the guy, and it's haunting and quite beautiful. Yeah. He's understood how to play a traffic cone better than probably any human being on the planet. And
necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes, he's quite clearly a heroin addict, and this is how he makes his money. But the licensing system that's going to come up in 3 or 4 months will never license him. They will never facilitate him developing that craft of playing a traffic cone.
Sure.
How do we keep people developing these strange crafts, particular unique crafts that are low budget and are trashy as fuck, but they do develop some intrinsic value?
Yeah. You know, the world has changed so much, Matt. I remember in the 90s, you know, I've been involved at the administrative level and the organizational level for some time in my life, since the beginning, really, that, you know, learning to speak the language of the bureaucrat was something that, even though I'm a street performer, I learned how to do, because when I got my first opportunities at Harbourfront in Toronto, it was because I knew how to speak the language, that I was allowed to play there when there were very few people playing there. You know, it was the beginning of an era, and as I opened it up and as other performers came down and started joining in on the thing, and there were other performers, I wasn't just the only one. There was like a couple of others that were down there doing their thing, so we were kind of like working it out amongst ourselves. And then it became more popular.
There's no shame in saying that you were a driving force in that. There's no shame in that.
No, there isn't. I'm proud to be able to say that I was one of the first people to play at Harbourfront. And I think I told you in the last interview that I had gained the respect of the administration of Harbourfront because I treated them in a business-like fashion. I kept my costume clean. I didn't swear in my show. I was giving thought and consideration to the fact that the audiences were coming there were family audiences. And because of that, they offered me a lifetime card to be able to go down there and play anytime I wanted, which made me question, you know, the integrity of that offer. That I went, no, you know, my initial impulse was, yeah, give me that card. But then I knew that I would have to suffer, you know, the fact that performers would eventually find out that I was getting special treatment. So I wanted to be a part of the audition process. I wanted to go in. I wanted to see what they were going to do. And as it turned out, I got to do it 1 year and I got my card. You know, it was like they kind of just handed me, okay, you're going through this. Okay, here you go. You know, but they knew what they were going to get from me and they wanted me.
What about
there.
The guys that would never get through that?
Well,
do you think those guys, the guys that would never be able to get through that? My traffic cone guy.
Yeah.
Does he have a right? Does he have a right, or is there a place for him in the world now?
Well, like I say, the world is a real changing place. There was a guy in Belgium. He called himself the Hunger Artist, and he would play in front of the cathedral in Antwerp. And he looked like a guy. He was dirty. He was skinny. He had a dirty cup. His fingernails were covered in dirt. His face was filthy. His hair was stringy and matty. He had no shoes on. His feet were filthy. And he had a little bucket in front of him. And he was there like quite frequently. And I remember going out clubbing one night with some friends. And there he was on the dance floor in a very nice suit, dancing and buying drinks. And I went up to him and I went, "Hey, aren't you that guy that plays the beggar on the street?" And he goes, "Aren't you the beggar on the street?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "You don't look like you're suffering." And he goes, "It's an act. It's just an act." And I'm like, so he was intelligent enough to understand that if he played this role, he would make money, and he made a killing because people saw him as a reminder of what they could potentially become if they,
But
weren't
that's
gracious.
that's
And I
the
know
other-
that's not
that's
answering your
deceptive
question.
grift. That's a deceptive grift, and I would argue that perhaps the problematic nature of that is that there's a deceit playing upon charity, whereas my traffic cone player guy has developed a craft. It's
Yeah,
a unique, trashy craft, but he developed a craft. And if you have everywhere licensed and everywhere auditioned, my man is never going to walk there in his disheveled clothes and put his traffic cone on and get that booking. So how do we find, and this is, I think, the difficulty is, how do we find a middle point where we can have traffic cone guy developing his own unique work? Who knows, in 5 years' time, he might stand on the stage with a traffic cone and a mic, probably not, but maybe. How do we stop? How do we still enable creativity from people who are not trained and able to engage in that world? And I think that's the thing people get to when they're worried about organization is those people, because we always,
Well, as we bring this interview to a close, and this is probably a good place to pick it up next time, is what you're talking about is a very real issue, and what it comes down to, and there's a big difference again between Europe and the Anglo-American world, that litigation and liability are the things that sit at the forefront of most bureaucrats' minds. That if traffic cone guy is in some way, shape, or form impinging on the aesthetic of the area, for example, and you've got property owners and taxpayers who see him as an eyesore and potentially bad for the community, the question has to ask, how did this guy end up in this position in the first place? Which you don't see so much in Europe and on the mainland. That you get on the trains here in Berlin, and there are, old ladies and derelict guys on the trains with their cups, walking down the thing, hoping they're going to get 10 cents. And it happens here, and it's not going to stop here because there is still in this part of the world a leniency towards that. So I don't know how to answer your question because I think it is very location specific. And one of the reasons, one of the reasons I had to leave North America and I eventually left Australia is that empathy and compassion for those who are less fortunate than us is disappearing. It's evaporating, and it's exemplified by your traffic cone guy. That why can't they just leave him on the corner and let him do what he does? Why don't they let him become an institution on that corner? Why don't they let him become like the hunger artist guy who, as you say, might be a grift, but is an act nonetheless, and he makes enough from it that he can go clubbing on the weekend and actually have
a service in a way. It's a grifty service.
It's a service, and it's a service that's reminding people that if you don't tow your weight in society, you could end up like this guy, and that's, I remember being in Norway and there was like one homeless guy. And I remember asking about him. I said, why is that guy living on the streets? I go, we don't know, because in Norway, you can get a house. You can live somewhere. This guy is on the streets because he wants to be. And a society like that, which has a very firm and solid social infrastructure, puts up with him because that's his choice. And they don't try and brush him off. He's the reminder that you can make this choice. So yeah, it'd be good to pick up on that again, because what happens in the next part of the story is trying to set up a street performers association, not just in Melbourne, but trying to go to other cities. And I don't know if you ever talked to Dom about this during the interview, but there was a lot of debate and arguments and anger about the fact that I and several other performers could see that if we didn't get in front of the city bureaucracies, that we were going to be regulated out of existence, that we were going to lose our pitches, young performers and people like your traffic cone guy would not have any provision made for them, that we would be essentially bound by cities' needs and the needs of the taxpayers and the needs of the property owners, when we are still providing a social service that, the city should be paying for. And in Europe, they do. So what is it about the Anglo-American society that has devalued what we provide to society, turned us into clowns and variety people when there's so much more to explore in the street? Why don't we see a tradition of spectacle on Anglo-American streets? Why not? I ask this question a lot. Is it got something to do with the fact that the society doesn't promote abstracts? Is it because the artist in European society has a voice that may speak against certain accepted norms that are imposed by the authority and
I'll bring up one idea as we reach the end of this. Is it because of the changing idea of social status and the idea that the Anglophile kind of countries have changed their idea of social status quite greatly in the last 30 years, because we've kind of deconstructed a lot of the social elements of our society, and a lot of the virtues of the working man have been removed. The ideas of the thing of, social conscience has gone. Dave, we've got to end this at this point now. We can say we do 3 hours. We're on 3:05. I really want to pick this up again soon, and we will. And let's leave space to do that. We've got such interesting points to talk about. Is there any last points you want to say before we tie this in?
Yeah, I'd like to say that we've arrived at a point in history that started in the 80s. It is what you've exactly been talking about. It's the fact that we have witnessed the breaking of the social contract, that neoliberalism has essentially washed over the globe and emanated primarily from the Anglo-American Empire as it pursued economic rationalism in the Milton Friedman School of Economics, which largely removes any kind of social safety net to protect people who might be in trouble as a result of having to participate in a system that removes regulation and protects the rights and needs of people who may not be protected by money. So the street performer runs the risk of becoming extinct because of regulation, because of a whole range of problems that deal with living in a consumer society. And the only way to truly fight back against that is to change our governing structures so that our governments start investing more in social infrastructure, spend more on helping people solve their social problems and less on police, because the police are only used when social infrastructures collapse and people start running rampant in the streets. So let's defund the police departments, not abolish them, but give them 15% less and put it towards social programming, and use professional social professionals to help solve social problems. That's where I think street performers kind of fit, is that no matter what you're doing, you're providing a social service that helps us to maintain the social contract, which is compassion and empathy. I think that's really important.
Incredibly well said. David, a pleasure again, as always. I look forward to having you on again in November. For now, everybody's watching. Thank you for watching. From me, I say thank you and goodbye. David?
Thanks for watching, everybody.